So, I was just minding my own business in my room on a regular Tuesday, when a blinding pillar of light tore straight through my roof, looking like God himself forgot to turn off his spotlight. Congrats, buddy. You've been draft picked for the death game. Teleporting in 5 minutes. Sweet. Awesome. Fantastic. Just peachy. I mean, it's not like I haven't been stressing over this exact scenario for 2 decades. You see, I wasn't actually born in this dimension. I got hit with the Ice Sky truck as a baby 20 years ago, and this whole time, I was just waiting for my overpowered golden finger to activate. You know, the classic Reincarnator starter pack, right? But nope. 20 straight years of absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, this world has its own messed up little situation going on. Every single year, some creepy horror game randomly snatches 100,000 people, and practically none of them ever make it back. People try to fight back against it early on, but eventually everyone just kind of accepted it like, meh, traffic accidents take out way more people anyway, and just carried on with their lives. Humanity is truly built different. So, I gave my mom a quick call, not for some tearful final farewell, mind you. I literally just reminded her to monitor Dad's glucose levels. Gotta keep your priorities straight, guys. I grabbed a backpack, stuffed it with water bottles and instant ramen, since apparently you're allowed to bring personal items into the game. Just 0 weapons. You can't even sneak in a tiny pocket knife. This game runs tighter security than a TSA checkpoint on steroids. And then, with literally 60 seconds left on the countdown, guess what finally decides to show up? My cheat system, a whole 20 years late. Oh, super convenient. Initializing connection, 10%, 30%. Man, I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst into tears. I wanted to file a formal complaint with the Transmigration Bureau. You had 2 whole decades, and you choose this exact moment? Like, bro, I'm literally about to be launched into a deadly battle royale. But okay, at least it was downloading fast. 100% complete, with just seconds left to spare. Maybe I actually have a shot at surviving this after all. And, right on cue, everything completely broke down. The horror game software. And my system interface started glitched out brawling inside my head, resembling 2 massive programs attempting to install simultaneously, completely crashing my whole neural network. I caught scrambled fragments about data collision, forced override, and ability extraction, all blended together into a chaotic slurry of fatal system errors, and then BM, total blackout. I was out cold. When I finally came to, my head felt like it was going to explode, with my ears buzzing like I'd been glued to the main speakers at a heavy metal gig. And where was I? Definitely not in that cozy, sterile white safe house that previous survivors always talk about in their logs. Nope, not even close. I was sitting in some dilapidated stone hall that looked like a medieval dungeon. Had a baby with a dark, damp cavern. Right there sat an ancient stone throne carved with creepy symbols. Rotted wooden debris littered the entire floor, and gaping holes in the ceiling exposed a miserable, gloomy gray sky. System. I called out, desperately praying for a response. System. Pure, deafening silence. Great. My $1 trillion cheat engine just got totally wrecked by a horror game. Talk about a record-breaking speedrun to complete uselessness. Hold on, though, I vaguely remembered hearing something about a special talent, right before I passed out cold. So I pulled up my status window, and man, it was downright weird. An SSS rank talent. Bones of the Ancient Tomb. Sounds ridiculously badass. I'm not gonna lie. But then, the rest of my interface looked like someone slapped a city builder straight onto a survival horror game. I had an F-rank territory that was literally on the brink of total collapse. My structures were nothing but broken ruins. My resource counts were deep in the red. And my grand population? 1 skeleton advisor and 2 skeleton foot soldiers. I'm not ruling a kingdom here. I'm managing a graveyard with a corporate hierarchy. This whole mess screamed dead on arrival, literally. The system called itself the Home Landlord system. So naturally, it dumped the Lord's domain on me. A completely trashed territory, sure. But still, before I could even wrap my head around just how badly I got ripped off, a sharp clattering sound came from right behind me. Clack, clack, clack. It sounded like someone shaking a bag of dice. Except those dice were definitely human bones. And then, a raspy voice spoke up. My lord, you have finally returned. I whipped around, and yep, it was a walking skeleton. Looks like employee orientation just officially started. I turned around and nearly jumped 5 feet out of my skin. A literal, fully animated skeleton was shuffling right toward me. Blue, ghostly flames dancing inside its hollow eye sockets. Wearing tattered, threadbare rags. And clutching a battered notebook like some undead accountant. Get back. I yelled, and to my surprise, it actually stopped in its tracks and stood there, its jawbone clacking up and down as it blurted out, "My lord, our territory is in dire condition. May I present the situation report?" After 3 solid seconds of stunned silence, my brain finally reconnected the dots. "Oh, right. This is my subject's leader, my skeleton strategist, Ashwin. A walking bag of bones with major middle management energy." I slumped down onto the stone throne. "Hey, I might as well look the part," and gave him the green light. He flipped open his ledger, cleared his throat, how, when he's literally just dry bones, and hit me with the most soul-crushing financial audit in history. Total population, 3 skeletons, himself, and 2 skeleton grunts, named Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang. Infrastructure, 1 crumbling palace ruin, and a completely dried-up well. Resources, minus 1,000 energy points. And then he snapped the notebook shut. That was it, negative 1,000. I didn't just spawn at square one. I started off in massive debt, in a grim dark world surrounded by skeletal staff. The ledger laid down the brutal facts clear as day. Clear this deficit within 7 days, or the territory gets completely wiped out, and the Lord, which means me, gets permanently erased from existence. So my golden cheat system didn't give me godlike powers. It handed me a fat mortgage with a death clause attached. The well generates 20 units of energy daily, but our daily upkeep runs us 50, meaning I'm digging myself into a deeper hole every single day. As Yin pointed out, I could also gather energy by stepping into the Shadow Realm, which really was just an overly fancy skeleton term for the horror game's dungeon. We headed outside to inspect my grand kingdom, which was basically an overgrown stone plaza. A single rickety well featuring a rain shelter. Because why on earth do skeletons care about rain? And stretching past that, a whole field of graves. 2 tiny skeletons were timidly peeking from behind a tombstone. Like frightened little puppies, those were my elite military forces. Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang. They rushed right over and instantly face-planted into a full kneel. I blurted out for them to stand up ASAP, honestly terrified they'd shatter into pieces, and I'd wipe out 60% of my entire army. Meanwhile, as I glanced over, Yun was busy scribbling notes in his book. I snuck a quick look and saw Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang. First official meeting with the Lord, performance poor. This guy was literally conducting employee reviews. Next, he guided me toward a glowing blue portal, hovering right near the graves, complete with a countdown timer. Dungeon opens in 1 hour and 55 minutes. So yeah, it was officially confirmed. I'm still trapped inside this horror game, and the Shadow Realm is literally just the game's dungeon given a spooky rebrand, leaving me with under 2 hours to figure out how to survive in there, while somehow working to pay off my skeleton mortgage. I waited 20 whole years for a cheat system, and all it handed me was soul-crushing debt and 3 bony co-workers to manage. Anyway, as Ian dropped the good news on me, pretty much every single object in the dungeon holds energy, and all I have to do is haul stuff back out. Sounds simple enough, right? Like grocery shopping, but haunted, while killing time for the portal to unlock. I wandered over to inspect my well, my only functional structure, my absolute pride and joy. I leaned over the stone rim, stared deep into the misty, bottomless void, and thought, nothing extraordinary here. Right then, the well sighed at me, a deep, exhausted, overly dramatic sigh, as if it was completely underwhelmed by its new landlord. I shot a look at Ayun, but he just offered a shrug. Turns out, the well has been letting out sighs forever, and nobody has any clue why. Plenty of previous lords attempted to strike up a conversation, getting 0 replies, just bad vibes. Now, speaking of those former lords, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked what happened to the last guy. Ayun flipped open his notebook, right to the specific page, and I found myself reading what was essentially a skeleton obituary. The previous lord had charged recklessly into the dungeon, boasting about how he'd conquer everything. Borrowed 200 points of energy from Ayun on his way out, promised to pay back double the moment he returned, and was never seen or heard from again. Panicked, I asked if his debt was getting dumped onto me, but Ayun said no. I've honestly never felt more relieved. Over a dead guy's defaulted loans in my life. Then I finally remembered to actually examine my skills, instead of losing my mind. Skill number 1, Bones Among Dust. All deceased entities inside dungeons start out neutral toward me, which means ghosts and monsters won't instantly jump me on sight. That's practically an invisibility cloak, except tailored for the undead. Skill number 2, Summon Skeleton. Since I can warp my domain's residence right to where I'm standing, I can easily drag Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang straight into this dungeon to act as my bodyguards. Plus, they passively soak up energy. At 50 points a pop, completely effortlessly, just by standing close to me. They're basically walking bone piggy banks. Meanwhile, Ashwin was silently scribbling down notes right behind my back. The entire time, something I didn't even notice until afterward. He wrote down stuff like, "The new lord surveyed his land, appeared deeply dissatisfied, and stared at his troops with eyes full of concern. Combat proficiency, unknown. Odds of survival, unclear." Man, my own strategist was literally drafting my eulogy ahead of time. Talk about a massive vote of confidence. Right then, the portal countdown reached 0, and a system prompt flashed. Step inside within 60 seconds or face instant death. Classic system logic. I instructed Ashwin to guard our base, then dove straight into the rift. When I came to, I was sitting on a creepy, rundown bus. The dim yellow lights were flickering. The blacked-out windows hid whatever was outside, and the air reeked of damp mildew. 3 other passengers were sitting scattered in the seats ahead of me. Suddenly, the PA speaker static crinkled. Bus 444, approaching South City Tower. Then, the dungeon details popped up. Death bus, D-rank. Goal, stay alive until the final destination. Side objective, assist passengers with their personal requests, along with one friendly warning. The moment you lock eyes with IT, disaster will find you. Sounds simple enough, right? Just stay put, avoid staring at anything weird, and ride out this spooky trip to the end. However, as soon as my eyes landed on the seat cover beside me, an item tooltip appeared. Worn seat cover. 15 energy points. Wait a minute. This entire bus was literally farmable loot. I stepped in here expecting to survive a terrifying horror trial, and somehow I stumbled right into a ghost-themed IKEA clearance sale. Forget the main dungeon quest line. Forget the quest rewards. I now had one main objective, and one main objective only. Strip this entire bus down to its bare metal for points, before we reached the final stop. After all, my domain's crushing debt wasn't going to clear itself, and every single cushion on this haunted jalopy was worth 15 units of sweet ghost juice. The only problem was, I couldn't just start ripping seats apart in broad daylight, like some deranged bus vandal. So, I immediately summoned Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang, my elite skeleton duo, and shoved them into the row right ahead of me to act as a unliving privacy shield. The moment those 2 boneheads materialized, they broke into a full-on victory dance, clacking their jaws and flailing their arms around, like they just hit the skeleton jackpot. Turns out, the ambient energy on this bus was insanely higher than back in our broke-ass territory, and these guys were practically hyperventilating with pure bliss. I mean, back home. After Ashwin claimed his daily 15-point allowance from the well, these two had to split a miserable 5 points between them. In here, though, every single breath was an all-you-can-eat buffet. I shut them up real fast. Freeze right now, or I'm sending you straight back. Instant silence. God, I love total obedience. Little did I realize that my tiny skeleton stunt was actually scaring the daylights out of everyone else. This poor guy named Xiao Yishao, a rookie just like me, happened to glance back at the worst possible second and watch 2 skeletons spawn out of thin air right beside me. Then, when I crouched down to mess with the seat covers, he checked again and saw those skeletons had crept closer, staring dead at him, while the human behind them had completely vanished. The dude was fully convinced I'd been devoured alive. Meanwhile, my 2 boneheads were literally whispering to each other about him. Xiao Zhang nudged Xiao Wang like, "See? Told you he'd look back. Good thing I made you slide over, or he would have clocked the boss." They were running a whole tactical cover operation and felt so ridiculously proud of themselves. The bus driver definitely noticed 2 skeletons hopping on without paying, but decided it was way above his pay grade. I mean, he gets paid the same either way, right? Honestly, respect. So while every single player on this bus was paralyzed with fear, debating whether to risk the side quest of helping passengers with their problems, I was down on my knees, discovering that these seat covers actually had zippers. Total game changer. The first one popped right off. 15 points straight into my inventory. I locked eyes on the rest of the seats, like a predator eyeing a flock of sheep. So much loot, so little time. I was about to strip this entire bus bare. I was just moving on to my next target, when the bus ground to a halt. South City Tower. Departing passengers, please step off. Incoming passengers, pay the fare or suffer the consequences. Both doors hissed open. Outside, an eerie skyscraper glowed under flickering lights, and I could hear faint screaming in the distance. Two shadowy figures emerged from the station and stepped inside, dropping a coin into the fare box with a clank. I glanced up to see who just joined the ride, and honestly, these two looked surprisingly normal. Just exhausted office workers in rumpled suits. The classic salarymen who pass out on public transit after being forced to work overtime past midnight. One leaned back and shut his eyes, while the other kept his head down, acting like he was asleep. Except he wasn't sleeping at all. I caught him low-key scanning everyone on board. This guy was literally hunting for his next target. Then our eyes met, and my heart instantly sank. The system warning specifically said, making eye contact means game over. I braced for the absolute worst. But the dude just looked away, didn't come near me, didn't transform, nothing. He just grumbled, "Since when did this become a city of skeletons?" and went back to faking a nap. My bones among dust skill literally just saved my life by making me look totally uninteresting to an actual ghost. Best passive skill ever. So naturally, I got right back to business. Professional seat cover removal guy right here. Meanwhile, some dude named Li Xiaoyu, a few seats ahead, was losing his mind. Turns out he was a second-time player. He'd read on the forums that just doing the basic survival quest was basically a slow death sentence. A tiny 10 points won't get you anything useful, and without any upgrades, future dungeons would tear him to pieces. He'd already wasted 8 points on a paper talisman and had one big knife in his inventory. So he was staring at those office workers, trying to decide if he should trigger the side quest. He took too long, though, because office worker number 2, the creepy one, teleported right behind him, without making a single sound. No footsteps, no breathing. Nothing, just suddenly appeared, hovering right over Li Xiaoyu's neck, looking like a broken puppet dangling from invisible threads. "You seem really interested in watching me." Li Xiaoyu let out a scream and slammed against the glass so hard I could hear it clear from the back row. I peeked through the gap between my skeleton guards and took in the whole nightmare scene. A hanging ghost just floating in midair. Snapped neck tilted sideways, face turning purple. I stared at him for about 2 seconds, decided it wasn't my business, and went right back to unzipping the next seat cover. The ghost guilt-tripped Li Xiaoyu into taking a quest. Find his missing hanging rope, somewhere along the bus route. He couldn't remember which stop he'd lost it at, and if Li Xiaoyu failed, he'd be trapped on this bus forever, keeping the ghost company until someone else found it. Naturally, Li Xiaoyu agreed so fast. He almost choked on his own tongue. The ghost gave a warm smile and said, "I knew I picked the right guy," which is easily the single terrifying phrase ever uttered. On public transport, I stuffed another seat cover into my backpack, another 15 points in the bag. Honestly, being completely unremarkable and invisible was the ultimate power in this horror game. While everyone else was getting traumatized, I was back here running a one-man fabric recycling operation in the rear row. So, while I was busy running my solo bus, stripping service in the back, the drama up front was getting wild. I had front row seats, well, back row seats, technically, to watch everyone else make absolute terrible life choices through the gaps in my skeleton meat shields. First up was Li Xiaoyu and his little rope hunt. The bus pulled up to the second stop, and this poor guy actually stepped off to go look for the hanging ghost's lost rope, completely alone in the pitch black on a cursed route. The ratio of courage to actual brain cells in this guy was something else. I tried watching him through the window, or tried to anyway, since the glass was basically just blacked out panels of total darkness, with tiny blurbs of light every now and then. From what I could make out, the stop didn't look like much, just a couple of benches and a small shelter. Li Xiaoyu was frantically digging through a trash bin, resembling a guy desperately searching for lost keys in a lot. Only these keys belonged to a hanged spirit, and the environment itself was out to destroy him. He searched beneath the benches, scoured the stop, and even flipped the garbage can upside down. Still no rope to be found anywhere. Meanwhile, the hanging specter stayed glued to the glass, looking like a toddler glued to the TV, tongue hanging out and practically drooling in excitement. The monster was just waiting for Li Xiaoyu's time to run out. As it turns out, a hidden timer was ticking down. Linger outside the bus too long, and you become ghost food. Li Xiaoyu didn't have a clue about the hidden rule. He was just operating on the basic logic that the driver wasn't going to stick around forever, so he booked it back inside, with mere seconds remaining. The specter's creepy grin instantly froze, looking like a video paused, on the absolute worst frame possible. You could practically hear it screaming in pure frustration. It grumbled something under its breath about Li Xiaoyu getting lucky, and then fell silent. However, I noticed how its mouth slowly curled back into a smirk. A few moments later, slow and calculated, as if it knew a secret that Li Xiaoyu had missed, That rope was hidden in a truly awful spot, a place even the ghost refused to touch. This side quest was rigged right from the start, and Li Xiaoyu had barely scraped by. The first round of an unwinnable game. I went back to stripping another seat cushion. Zip it, fold it, cram it into the bag, perfect. Now this is where things took a hilarious turn. Another survivor, a corporate worker type named Lin Yi, had been sitting frozen solid this entire time, relying on the classic, if I don't move, they can't target me, strategy. A smart play, honestly, when those two suit-wearing ghosts got on earlier. He didn't even blink. He was fully aware that overworked salarymen harbor the deepest grudges, whether living or dead, so he kept his eyes glued to the floor, like his survival depended on it, because it literally did. Seeing Li Xiaoyu return in one piece, however, instantly triggered something in his head. He immediately began running the numbers. The basic quest rewards 10 points. 10 points gets you cheap junk, no upgrades. Means guaranteed death in future dungeons. Making extra quests dangerous but essential. His inner accountant was carrying out a full-blown cost-benefit analysis while sitting right inside a curse bus. I had to respect the hustle, even if the timing was extremely risky. Lin Yi checked out his potential targets. The hanging ghost? Absolutely out of the question. That creature was straight-up nightmare fuel. However, sitting all the way in the back was a student spirit. A quiet kid holding a backpack and a book, just sitting there reading peacefully, acting like this was just a normal weekday ride. Lin Yi's logic was basic. Student equals an easy task, and an easy task guarantees free points. Decent theory, but his execution was absolutely disastrous, because he walked straight over, sat himself down right beside the entity, and opened with the most generic icebreaker imaginable. Hey, there, little guy, need a hand? The kid looked up, and their eyes locked. With the quest accepted, the boy dug through his bag and pulled out a sheet of paper. Now, I was expecting some sinister treasure map, or a note written in blood. Nope, it was a test. A high school exam paper, to be exact. The ghost kid's unfinished homework. The side quest was literally, finish this ghost math test for him. Lin Yi's face cycled through like 15 different emotions in 2 seconds. Sheer confusion, instant relief, and then a sudden, wait, is this actually hard? Then the quest reward flashed. 50 points, 5 times the standard payout. Lin Yi was hyped for all of 3 seconds, until he spotted a major red flag. There was no failure penalty listed anywhere. And in horror games, no stated penalty usually means the penalty is death. Right on cue. The kid's eyes turned into pitch-black voids, and blood started pouring down his face, like someone opened a valve right behind his eyeballs. He asked in the most nightmare-inducing voice possible, "Are you backing out?" Lin Yi spat out a "no" so fast he almost bit his tongue off. Instantly, the ghost kid snapped back to normal, as if nothing happened, then casually dropped the real catch. Finish before the final stop, or I eat you. So Lin Yi looked down at the exam, and his soul pretty much left his body. It was a senior year test, and this dude had been out of school for ages. Every single piece of math knowledge had abandoned his brain, taking his hairline along with it for good measure. He desperately looked for a loophole. The task said to complete the test, not pass it, so maybe he could just scribble random nonsense. The ghost shot that idea down on the spot. Looking almost bored. You need a passing grade at least. Don't try to get clever. I gotta watch this whole train wreck happen, while casually unzipping my 8th seat cover. Zip, fold, stuff, another 15 points added to the stash. My backpack was getting delightfully heavy, while every other passenger on this bus was fighting for survival, making deals with demonic entities, and doing ghost homework under threat of getting eaten alive. There I was crouched behind a pair of skeletons, peacefully stripping public transit furniture, like the most efficient vandal alive. Honestly, best horror game experience ever. 10 out of 10 would rip up bus seats again. Final seat cover finished, 5 total. That's 75 points worth of energy crammed into my bag. Looking like the world's most cursed laundry bag, I stretched out my neck, cracked my knuckles, and took a quick victory lap by scanning the bus interior. Li Xiaoyu was staring out the window, plotting his next move to hunt for ropes. That kid, Xiaoyu, was still glancing back at my skeletons every 3 seconds, terrified they'd jump over the seats and devour him. And then there was Lin Yi, a grown-ass man, hunched over a high school exam, in the back row, sweating buckets, with his veins practically bulging out, looking like he was attempting to unravel the secrets of the universe, rather than just solving algebra problems. A ghost student was seated right beside him, giving off intense get-it-done-or-die vibes. It was total, beautiful madness everywhere you looked. Not my problem, though. I was completely done. Task complete. My seat cover empire was officially locked down. Time to kick back, chill out, and take this creepy bus all the way to the finish line, without any extra hassle, until I caught a glimpse of it. Hanging on the wall, directly behind the driver's seat, there sat a dusty old blanket. My eyes immediately locked onto it, and the system tooltip popped up right away. Fox fur blanket, 100% quality, 100 energy points. That single blanket right there was worth way more than all those seat covers. I just spent the whole past hour painstakingly unzipping put together. My brain completely glitched out and instantly started calculating numbers at a speed I hadn't reached since taking my college entrance exams. 75 points from the covers, 100 from the blanket, plus whatever Little Jean and Little Wong were passively absorbing. In just one single dungeon run, I could clear out nearly a third of my massive debt, pay off what I owe, expand my domain, summon more skeletons, assemble a massive army, and conquer the whole world. I was already imagining myself perched on a stone throne, with 100 skeleton soldiers bowing down before me, and a couple of the sharper ones, draping a royal golden robe right over my shoulders. The Emperor of the Undead, the Lord of Bones. This horror game wouldn't even know what hit it. I jumped up so fast, I almost slammed my head into the roof, and strode straight toward the front of the bus, like a man with a clear target. The dangling ghost glanced my way as I walked by, but immediately looked back away, still completely indifferent. My passive trait was doing absolute wonders. I took a seat directly behind the driver and started tugging on that blanket. It wouldn't budge, so I pulled harder, still nothing. I grabbed hold with both hands and planted my feet firmly against the floorboard, gearing up like a total pro tug-of-war champion. That's enough, and I froze right mid-pull. The driver was staring right at me through the rearview mirror, shaved head, dark shades reflecting the dim interior lights of the bus, with a look that was a mix of pure annoyance and total exhaustion. Those seat covers belong to the transit company, so whatever, I couldn't care less. He muttered, but that blanket happens to be mine. Our eyes locked right through the glass, and I felt a sudden surge of panic. Making direct eye contact with a dungeon entity usually meant bad news. Then again, my passive skill had been carrying me fine all day. Still, getting caught red-handed, trying to swipe a ghost bus driver's personal blanket, was definitely not how I pictured this whole situation playing out. Haha, my bad about that. I let go and chuckled like a total dummy. Full-on awkward mode activated. The driver let out a sigh, the heaviest sigh I'd heard since that whole deal. Well, back in my domain, kid. Things aren't so awful in this town, especially since you're young and fit. There's bound to be a job out there for you somewhere. It's not like you have to strip down public transit to make a living. Hell, I could even ask around my workplace and hook you up. Yep, this dude legit thought I was a small-time thief. Just some broke, hopeless young guy, jacking parts off a bus, simply because I couldn't land a job. Man, my pride took a severe hit right then. I instantly started waving my hands frantically. Whoa, hold up. No, you've completely got the wrong idea here. I'm not jobless. I just have a massive thing for collecting random stuff. He just stared at me for 2 agonizingly long seconds, through his rearview mirror before letting out another deep sigh. Look, if you're really that set on getting the blanket, we can probably make it happen. My ears instantly perked up like a dog hearing a treat bag rustle. All right, I'm listening. Just do me a quick little favor, and the blanket is all yours. Though naturally, you're free to say no. I pass. That rejection shot right out of my mouth. Before the guy could even finish what he was saying, I knew precisely where this trap was leading. Asking for a small favor on a ghost-infested bus is just secret code for, hey, please sign up for this absolutely terrifying side quest that will probably get you killed. I had literally just watched every other person on this ride get tricked into taking on deadly tasks the moment they made eye contact or started talking, and I was definitely not about to fall for that trap. 100 points wasn't worth throwing my life away for. My current strategy of staying utterly boring and completely hidden was working just fine, and I fully intended on keeping it that way. The driver's jaw literally hit the floor, reflected right there in the mirror. I could actually see his shades slide down his nose, about half an inch purely from total shock. He just sat there, stunned, processing my response for 3 full seconds. You aren't even going to bother asking what the favor is? I was already turning on my heel to head straight back to my seat. Don't care, whatever it might be. The answer's a hard pass. Smell you at the final stop. Get back over here. His shout echoed across the entire bus like a crack of thunder. Everyone froze instantly. Linya's pen stopped dead in the middle of her equation. Li Xiaoyu flinched so violently he nearly tumbled right out of his seat. Heck, even the dangling ghost snapped up straight and averted its gaze. looking like a little kid who just got caught misbehaving. The driver scanned the whole bus through his rearview mirror. Mind your own damn business, all of you. And just like that, every single entity on board, without hesitation, suddenly acted like they were deeply fascinated by something else. Man, even the actual ghosts were terrified of this guy. So there I stood in the middle of the aisle, quickly weighing my options. On one hand, I was fully within my rights to decline and just walk away. But on the other hand, this was the guy steering the very bus. I desperately needed to survive on until reaching the final destination, and turning the driver into my enemy felt like the absolute fastest express route to a game over screen. I could literally envision the death pop-up notification right now. Player Su Yushio, cause of death. Victim of road rage. Sighing, I turned back and leaned up against the guardrail, right beside the driver's seat. Crossing my arms, I said, "You literally told me I had the choice to decline. I said you could decline. But you could at least hear me out before shutting me down." The guy was legitimately pissed off. "You went and cut me off before I could even explain what I needed. Don't I deserve a little baseline respect?" I stared over at this bald, sunglass-wearing phantom bus driver, who was throwing a total fit, just because I bruised his ego, and a switch inside my head suddenly flipped. This guy wasn't intimidating at all. He was just an old soul desperate to vent. All right. Fair enough, I said, dismissively waving my hand like I was placating a toddler. "Spill it, I'm listening." He opened his mouth, hesitated, and decided to let the condescending attitude slide. Smart move. He stared dramatically out the windshield, gazing into the abyss of the road ahead, and began in a solemn, melancholy tone. It was roughly 80 years ago. Yeah, skip to the main point, please. His entire cinematic build-up shattered into pieces. He whipped around, glaring at me with pure venom in his eyes, opening his mouth, closing it, then opening and closing it again. You could literally watch the inner crisis between. I actually need this kid's help, and I'm going to throw him off this moving bus, playing out across his face in real time. In the end, he swallowed his pride and forced his eyes back onto the road. I almost felt a little guilty, keyword almost. But look, I had a massive debt to clear and a domain to rebuild, and I definitely didn't have time for an 80-year ghost tragic backstory. The ball driver looked like he was about to shatter his own teeth, from how hard he was clenching his jaw. Fine, I'll cut to the chase. He exhaled heavily, a breath that felt like it came from the depths of his spectral soul. Back in the day, I was a delivery driver. Okay, now that caught me off guard. A ghost bus driver origin story. Starting off as a takeout courier? Definitely not the epic backstory I was preparing myself for. One day I was dropping off an order, and a security guard at the apartment gate stopped me and refused to let me through. That part? Whatever, I could deal with that. But then he started hurling insults at me. I talked back a bit, and he beat the hell out of me. His voice was eerily calm, way too calm, like he'd been rehearsing this exact speech in his head every single day for decades. Yet his knuckles gripping the steering wheel were turning as white as the rib cages of my skeleton warriors. I was weak back then. Couldn't even defend myself. He paused. That was 80 years ago. 80 years. This guy had literally been carrying a grudge against a random security guard for nearly a whole century. I've seen people hold on to bitterness before, but this was world-class. Olympic level, record-shattering, Hall of Fame petty. That hanging ghost sitting a few rows back had nothing on this level of pure, uncut grudge. Now I'm stronger, he said, before turning to look at me, completely taking his eyes off the road for the first time, which was terrifying for completely non-supernatural reasons. I mean, the guy wasn't even driving, before dropping the real punchline on me. My next shift change isn't for another half-century, and I can't wait that long. Reaching down right beside his seat, he pulled something out. When I glanced down, I saw a wrench. Though calling this thing a wrench was like calling a tsunami. Just a little bit of water. It was absolutely massive, caked in filthy grease stains, and easily weighed 10 pounds of pure metal fury. It looked capable of knocking out a rhino, let alone a simple security guard. He thrust it toward me, saying, "We're going to pull up near that apartment complex soon. I'll stop for 10 minutes. Take this, walk over to the guard booth, and crack him right over the head with it." Just one solid hit. I grabbed the wrench with both hands, and its sheer weight instantly dragged my arms toward the floor. Like a heavy anchor, as I struggled to lift it, a system tooltip popped up, Wrench of Resentment, worth 150 energy points, medium attack power, and a special effect. Bonus damage against anyone named Wang Guiqing, plus a guaranteed knockout on the very first hit. This absolute lunatic had literally custom-crafted a weapon with a name-specific special perk. He'd been hauling this chunk of iron around for years, obsessively perfecting his revenge strategy, just waiting for someone clueless enough to do the dirty work for him. And naturally, that clueless sucker was me. You want me to bash a security guard with this? He nodded. A security guard you lost to 80 years ago? He nodded again. So how strong is he now after 80 whole years? The driver went dead silent for a moment way too long. 80 years have passed. So he's probably gotten a lot stronger too. You don't even know, and you're sending me in? I've been trapped driving this bus for 60 years. How am I supposed to know what he's been up to? At this point, we were both straight up yelling. Just two guys screaming at the top of their lungs on a curse bus, in the middle of nowhere, aggressively debating whether a security guard ghost had been leveling up his stats for the last 8 decades. Talk about the peak horror game experience. He was the first to chill out, probably realizing he needed my help way more than I needed his. His tone softened up a bit. Look, he's most likely still a weakling. I mean, if he'd actually accomplished anything big, he wouldn't still be working a security guard gig, right? I just glared at him. He weighs around 400 pounds. So he's kind of hard to miss, he added helpfully. And if you get over there and he isn't around, just walk right back. No harm done. Right on cue, a quest window popped up. Help the driver get his revenge. Rewards: the fox fur blanket plus 200 energy points. Accept or decline. Now, unlike every other player stuck on this bus, I actually had a choice here. That beautiful little accept or decline prompt just sat there glowing, all thanks to my passive skill. I could easily walk away completely unscathed, 0 risk. But then I quickly did the math. The blanket alone was worth 100 points. The wrench added another 150, and the quest itself paid out 200. That was 20 times the payout of the basic survival task. And if things were to go south, I could simply fail the quest and get out of there. There was no penalty listed. No. I'll devour you if you don't finish this clause. Like poor Lynn had to deal with. Yep, that was a homework assignment straight from hell. The moment I accepted, the driver's face cracked into the widest grin I'd seen on any ghost all day long. He knew he had picked the right guy. He reached under his seat once again and pulled out a dusty, ancient water bottle without a label. Here, have a drink, brother. I was about to politely decline, but right then, a notification popped up. Energy container, capacity, 350 points. This wasn't water at all. It was a portable energy tank. I snatched it right out of his hands so fast. He probably thought I was dying of thirst. There was no way I was going to drink whatever mystery liquid ghosts kept in unlabeled bottles. But as a storage item, an absolute treasure. Sit right behind me, the driver offered warmly. I'll cover your back. Nobody on this bus will mess with you, as long as you're under my protection. Just like that, I was promoted from bus vandal to VIP passenger. I had a ghost bodyguard behind the wheel, 2 skeleton bodyguards sitting right ahead of me, an anti-security guard super weapon resting on the floor, and a backpack completely stuffed with stolen seat covers. For a split second, I actually thought about stealing the wrench. Once the quest was done, 115 points were just sitting right there. However, the item was clearly custom-made, steeped in decades of deep resentment. There was no shot the driver wouldn't realize it was gone. So, I leaned back into my seat and closed my eyes. Between dealing with the system crash, the territory debt, harvesting seat covers, and negotiating with the driver, I was totally exhausted. The driver would surely wake me up when we arrived anyway. After all, he'd been waiting 80 long years for this exact moment. So he definitely wasn't about to let me sleep through it. From across the aisle, I could vaguely hear Li Xiaoyu, practically hyperventilating out of sheer envy. Turns out he'd been watching my entire interaction with the driver from start to finish, seeing me argue, refuse, get yelled at, and somehow walk away with free weapons, free containers, and full VIP protection. Meanwhile, there he was, risking his life, hunting for ghost ropes at creepy bus stops. I almost felt bad for the guy. Emphasis on almost. When I finally woke up, my neck was bent, at an angle that would make a chiropractor weep. Sleeping on a haunted bus? 0 stars. Absolutely would not recommend. I knocked on the driver's glass panel and asked where we were, which turned out to be a completely useless question, since I didn't know a single street name. In this entire ghost city, my brain was clearly still booting up. Realizing that, I corrected myself and asked what actually mattered. How far were we from the security guard compound? Hearing that, the bald driver got so hyped. He nearly swerved right off the road. 2 more stops. Get ready. He immediately began giving me tactical advice, wildly waving one hand around while steering with the other, miming the act of smashing someone's skull open. His master strategy was breathtakingly simple. Charge in, smash everything, and charge out. A true military mastermind. This guy, Gazing down at the 10-pound wrench resting on the floor, I started doing some quick mental math. I could barely manage to lift this tool with both hands. Yet our mark was a 400-pound behemoth. Even if he wasn't tall, weighing 400 pounds meant he was built like a horizontal fridge. So, the driver's brilliant plan of whack him and run suffered from one massive, fatal flaw. It was an absolutely terrible tactic. That was when it hit me. I had minions. Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang had been sitting back there the entire trip, without contributing anything useful whatsoever, other than tormenting that poor kid, Xiao Yishao. As it turned out, my duo of skeletal summons had picked up a brand new pastime. Every single time, Xiao Yishao stole a glance behind him, they would whip their heads toward him in perfect synchronization. He'd jump out of his skin and snap his head back around, only to check again 10 seconds later. They'd glares right back, a cycle that had been repeating for hours. The two most bored skeletons in the world had basically created a paranormal game of peekaboo, and their sole test subject was right on the edge of a complete mental breakdown. Meanwhile, 3 brand new ghost passengers had gotten on while I was catching some ZS. One elderly spirit attempted to take the vacant seat right next to me, prompting the driver to yell at her until she backed off. She didn't try to argue, knowing full well the driver would literally devour her if she pushed her luck. My VIP escort service was operating seamlessly. Anyway, back to the game plan. If I sent Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang in ahead to act as a decoy, that pig-faced security guard would lock his focus onto them. From there, I could creep up from behind and land one perfectly executed, wrench-fueled knockout strike. It wasn't pretty, but it sure beat the driver's brilliant advice of, just improvise, man. I pressed the driver for a bit more intel on our target. He gave me 2 helpful details alongside one terrifying fact. Helpful detail number 1. Wang Guiqing despises couriers and corporate workers. If he spots either type, he immediately goes hostile. Helpful detail number 2. He's still just a security guard after 80 whole years, meaning his level probably hasn't increased much. The terrifying fact. He carries a stun baton, and it hits hard. Fantastic. My opponent was armed too. This was quickly shifting away from a stealth operation and straight into a full-blown boss fight. But hold on. He hates corporate workers? That sparked an idea in my head. If I could disguise myself as a white-collar employee, Wang Guiqing would charge right at me the second he saw me. I could use my own body as live bait, draw him right where I wanted him, and have my skeletons pincer him. The moment I went for the heavy wrench swing, all I was missing was one key item, a business suit. My eyes scanned across the interior of the bus and locked onto the hanging ghost, sitting right there in his rumpled office attire. A perfectly usable suit, currently worn by a dead guy who wasn't using it for anything besides moping around and creeping out players. I stood up and slid into the seat right beside him. Li Xiaoyu, who was sitting one row in front, leaned back so hard trying to catch what was happening that he nearly flipped his whole seat over. The hanging ghost didn't bother looking up at me. He already knew I was standing there. It's not like you can easily creep up on a demon, after all, but he was totally giving me the cold shoulder. I cleared my throat and decided to shoot my shot. Hey bro, mind doing me a solid and letting me borrow your suit for a bit? Instantly, the temperature around me plummeted like 15 degrees. The ghost slowly lifted his head. His expression went from resting dead face to full-on bloodthirsty killer in less than a second. Do you have a death wish? His voice sounded like crackling ice. I immediately threw my hands in the air. Whoa. Whoa. Just borrowing it. I'll get it right back. I promise. That was clearly the absolute worst thing to say, because his tongue, that hideous, pitch-black, half-meter-long tongue, shot straight out of his mouth, right at my face. The stench slammed into me before the tongue even reached. Rotting meat, mixed with some foul stuff I never want to identify. I threw my body backward so hard that I nearly tumbled right into the aisle. I'll grant your wish to die, he gurgled out through a mouth full of extended tongue, lunging straight at me. Man, this was really it. I'd managed to survive this whole cursed bus ride without taking a single scratch, dodging every ghost encounter through pure passive skill, keeping my energy low, maintaining perfect neutrality with every single supernatural entity on board. And now I was about to kick the bucket just because I asked to borrow a guy's jacket. What a ridiculous way to go out, player. Suyu, showing off the ultimate cause of death request. But right then, my guardian angel, my bald, sunglasses-wearing, grudge-holding guardian angel stepped in. Lend it to him, the driver bellowed from behind the wheel. What went down next was so fast, I almost missed it completely. The hanging hand straps dangling above the seats. those plastic loops you hold onto when you're standing, suddenly sprang to life. They whipped through the air like deadly snakes, coiled around the ghost's stretched out tongue, and yanked him straight up out of the seat. So now, the hanging ghost was literally hanging from the bus, tongue first, dangling from the ceiling, like some grotesque Christmas ornament. The driver had total control over this entire bus. Every strap, every handrail, every single bolt. This was his domain, and he just used it to clothesline. A ghost by its own freaking tongue. All because I needed to borrow a suit jacket. I just stood there, heart pounding out of my chest, that awful tongue smell still burning up my nose, watching a demon dangle from the roof, by his own hideous, extended body part. Somewhere in the back, Lin Yu was still quietly grinding out math homework. Zhao Yishao was probably sobbing her eyes out, and Li Xiaoyu had completely thrown in the towel, attempting to make sense of the utter chaos on this bus. Meanwhile, 3 stops down the line, inside a guard shack, a massive 400-pound, stubborn security guard was watching TV, laughing his head off, completely oblivious to the fact that a hairless phantom driver had spent 8 decades plotting his ruin, and that the weapon chosen for his retaliation was just a 20-year-old kid from a different realm, who couldn't even put clothes on properly, without triggering a cosmic catastrophe. The driver didn't hesitate for a single moment. Those overhead straps snatched the suspended spirits blazer right off his back, just like an overeager dry cleaner, leaving the spirit dangling in midair half-clothed, looking completely crushed. The driver actually had the nerve to glance back and ask, "You want his trousers as well?" And I was like, no way. Nah, the jacket is plenty. Seriously, stop. I was shaking my head so intensely, I nearly snapped my own neck. The suspended phantom looked like he was on the verge of breaking down crying. If we ended up taking his pants too, I was genuinely worried. We were about to witness history's first ghost mental breakdown. Right? On public transportation. The driver passed the blazer over toward me, using the overhead straps, and then gesticulated at the suspended ghost, channeling pure mafia kingpin energy. "This fellow is under my command now. Don't pull any funny business, or next time you'll be losing more than just a coat." The spirit huddled up in his seat like a defeated puppy and went dead silent. I actually felt a tiny bit remorseful. I patted his shoulder gently and told him, "Hey buddy, I'll give it back once I'm finished. I promise, but man, that was a huge mistake." The ghost burst into tears, straight up weeping. My single gesture of sympathy had completely demolished whatever remaining dignity he possessed. Being forcefully disrobed was one matter, but having the very guy responsible for it turn around to console you, that was the ultimate disgrace. Amidst his sobs, he was probably swearing off public transit forever, for the remainder of his eternal existence. Li Xiaoyu, on the other hand, was having absolute blast, watching his bully get publicly disgraced. The spectral jerk who'd been tormenting him the entire journey was now reduced to a crying wreck. Talk about sweet, poetic justice. Yet I also noticed him staring at me with expression that was part awe and part envy, just like a kid watching another kid scoop up all the premium Halloween treats. His ghostly superior threatened to end him every 5 minutes, while my spectral boss was handing me gear and stripping other spirits bare. For my sake, life really is unfair, even inside survival games. I passed the suit jacket over to one of my undead minions. "Here, put this on." Because honestly, I couldn't tell Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang apart anymore. Both bone piles looked totally identical, so I just pointed at the closer one and dubbed him Xiao Zhang. Maybe he was actually Xiao Wang, but whatever. He snatched the jacket and began shoving his bony arms into the sleeves, looking just like a toddler trying to put on clothes. Bones rattled and joints snapped. It took him a full minute, but he actually managed to pull it on. The jacket was pulled tight across his ribcage, with the buttons stubbornly refusing to snap over his sternum. The whole jacket just flapped open, making him look like a skeletal runway model who completely gave up on fashion norms. Still, from a distance, with the collar popped up and his arms mostly through the sleeves, he actually passed for an insanely skinny, extremely dead office worker. Close enough. By now, the entire bus had fallen dead silent as they watched this bizarre scene play out. Every single player had the exact same realization. Smacked them in the face at the very same time. Those 2 skeletons weren't just random aggressive mobs. They were my summons, obeying my every command. Turns out I was the guy casually bossing around an undead squad this whole time, while everyone else was shivering in pure terror. Poor Xiao Yixiao took the news the hardest. I mean, this kid had spent the entire trip absolutely petrified of Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang. Every single time he glanced back at them, Both skeletons would whip their heads toward him in perfect unison. He was convinced they were stalking him, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As it turns out, they were just bored out of their minds and playing peekaboo. They had basically been doing the skeletal version of making funny faces at a baby. Stare when he looks, hold still when he doesn't, and rinse and repeat forever. The two most underworked employees in the history of undead labor had literally created their own game, and Xiao Yixiao was their unwilling toy. Now that the truth was laid bare, Xiao Yixiao bolted upright in a wave of righteous fury, only to instantly drop right back into his seat, because he suddenly remembered that 5 minutes ago, our driver had stringed up a ghost and aggressively stripped it down for my sake, picking a fight with a guy backed by 2 skeleton bodyguards and a terrifying bus driver. Felt like a one-way ticket to joining that suspended ghosts pity party. So he just buried his face in his knees, seething in silence. To be honest, I hadn't even registered this guy's existence until that exact second. He had been stressing over me the whole journey, and I hadn't spared him a single glance, which, honestly, made it even more embarrassing for him. Meanwhile, Linya's pen froze mid-formula. He just blankly stared at the skeleton, trying to button up a suit coat, having a mini existential crisis on the spot, before quietly turning back to his exam paper. Hey, ghost homework doesn't pause for plot twists. I gave my squad a quick briefing. Xiao Zhang, wearing the suit, would head toward the guard post first, try to look as much like a normal office worker as a literal skeleton possibly could. The driver mentioned that Wang Wuqing had a deep-seated grudge against corporate types, meaning a suited-up guy walking toward his station was guaranteed to set off an aggressive reaction. So while Pig Face is distracted by the skeleton bait, I'll sneak around his back with the wrench and dish out one epic beatdown right to the back of his head. Xiao Long is on standby if things go south. A simple strategy, maybe a dumb one, but it's the best plan a guy with 2 skeletons and a revenge wrench can cook up. The driver cleared his throat behind his screen, letting me know we were 5 minutes out. Honestly, he was sweating this more than I was. 80 years of pure hatred was either about to pay off or completely blow up. I double-checked the most critical detail. 10 minutes was the maximum he could hold the bus. Not a single second longer, or I'd be left behind, stuck in Ghost City for all eternity. Turns out, illegal parking in the underworld carries penalties, way worse than a basic traffic fine. As the bus slowed, I looked through the dirty glass and saw a housing complex come into view. At the entrance was a tiny guard booth, glowing with a weak yellow bulb. I could make out a massive shadow sitting inside. The driver pulled over well before the actual stop, skipping the official drop-off completely, just so he could get front row seats to watch his arch-nemesis get demolished. 80 long years of waiting, and the guy was literally shaking with excitement, right there behind the wheel. He pointed a trembling finger at the station and told me to move, promising he'd be watching, so I grabbed the wrench, feeling my arm strain under its heavy weight. Xiao Zhuang stood right beside me, rocking his stolen suit, his jaw rattling softly while Xiao Wang cracked his neck bones, all geared up for brawl. It was the 3 of us against a 400-pound pig monstrosity, armed with a stun baton, and 8 decades of security experience. Seriously, what could go wrong? The bus doors hissed open, and I stepped out into the dark Ghost City night, flanked by my 2 skeleton minions. Like the absolute worst security detail ever, Li Xiaoyu hopped off right behind me, which honestly caught me off guard, since I'd completely forgotten he was even there. Turns out the guy had his own objective, scouring every single stop for that dumb hanging rope, which made total sense. For about 5 glorious seconds, Li Xiaoyu looked relieved to not be alone, until it hit him. I was marching straight toward the apartment complex, while he needed to stay at the bus stop, and his expression completely melted, like a soggy biscuit in water. The one moment he actually had backup, and we were going in totally opposite directions. But things took a turn for the absolute worst real quick, all because the driver had parked too early. Li Xiaoyu walked right into the fresh batch of passengers, waiting to board, as 2 eerie figures emerged from the gloom. One sported the head of a wolf, and the other a hyena, looking like a walking, talking Chinese idiom. Wolves and hyenas teaming up together, manifested right there as actual bus riders, their glowing green eyes locked dead set on the only living human at the bus stop. Li Xiaoyu's legs literally seized up in total panic. I'd feel bad, but I had my own mess to deal with. What went down after that, though, I only found out about later on. And honestly, it was the wildest plot twist ever. The hanging ghost actually saved him. Yeah, that exact hanging ghost. The guy I snatched the suit jacket from. The same dude who was weeping 5 minutes ago. He slammed his fists against the bus window, yanked it open, threw half his body outside, and unleashed the most insane tirade of cuss words I have ever heard in my entire life. Living or dead, literally every curse word known to man, plus a few more, that I'm pretty sure he made up on the spot, came spewing out his mouth, like a fire hose of pure verbal aggression, aimed right at the wolf and hyena duo. Those two instantly forgot all about Li Xiaoyu and stormed onto the bus looking absolutely livid. Then, the ghost screamed at Li Xiaoyu to stop being useless and tag along with me instead of searching to stop. Turns out the noose was in a security guard booth the entire time, and the ghost knew it all along. He originally wanted Li Xiaoyu to fail, so he'd be stuck on the bus forever. But since the driver's task and his own target aligned at the same spot, he decided to pivot his game plan. If Li Xiaoyu could snag the rope, while I handle the guard, it's a win-win for everyone. Well, everyone except the guard, that is. From inside the bus, I heard muffled thuds and screaming. Looks like the wolf and hyena were giving the ghost a beating for his colorful choice of words. I figured I'd better ignore that. I arrived at the apartment complex entrance and ducked behind a wall to scope out the target. A single glance through the booth window, and my whole strategy shattered completely. Wang Guiqing was an absolute tank. Not just 400 pounds like I was told, but ridiculously massive on top of it. Sitting in his chair, his back looked like a giant rock, stuffed into a uniform. He was laughing at an old TV screen, while shoveling food into his mouth. And even sitting down, he towered over me, standing on my tiptoes, holding the wrench high above my head. I did some quick mental math. If this behemoth stood up, his head would literally touch the ceiling. My full arm reach with the wrench would barely graze his lower back. I might as well try sneaking up on a giraffe. The whole plan relied on ambushing him from behind and cracking his head open, except I physically couldn't even reach his head. Xiao Zhang wearing his borrowed suit. Sure, pulling the guard detention forward was doable, but even if I lined up a clean angle from behind, I'd literally need a stepladder, a trampoline, or maybe even a whole light aircraft, just to reach high enough for a proper headshot. My brain was still doing all the crazy math. Could I pull off a running jump? Maybe parkour off something nearby? That was when Li Xiaoyu caught up to me, totally out of breath. He instantly locked eyes on that rope, dangling right from the ceiling of the guard booth. A split second later, he spotted the absolute unit sitting right underneath it, and his face turned completely ghost white. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. He pointed right at the rope. It all clicked. We were after the exact same objective. Knock this guard out cold and clear the path. Talk about a temporary alliance. You got any bright ideas to get past this guy? He asked. I held up the heavy wrench in my hand. I need to crack him over the head, but the only way I can hit his skull is if he stays seated and looks away, or if I somehow grow 3 feet taller. Li Xiaoyu stared at the wrench, glanced over at the guard, looked back at me, and dropped the most glaringly obvious solution. Something my galaxy brain had completely missed. Why don't I just put you on my shoulders? I facepalmed so hard my own hand was burning. Of course, I was so laser-focused on my original blueprint, skeleton distraction, stealth strike, pour le wolf play, that I completely ignored the easiest workaround possible. My whole game plan was built around soloing this fight, mainly because my only teammates were 2 skeletons. That would probably shatter if I tried piggybacking on them. But right beside me stood an actual, living human being, with actual muscle, perfectly capable of lifting me up, like a little kid trying to see over the crowd at a concert. "Can you actually hold my weight?" I checked. He gave me a look like I just insulted him. "Bro, I lift." So we did a quick test run right behind the wall. He dropped into a squat. I hopped onto his shoulders, and he stood straight up, steady as a rock. From up here, I could easily reach the skull of that oversized pig monster, armed with 10 solid pounds of pure, concentrated, 80-year-old grudge. The item's special effect guaranteed a one-hit knockout against anyone bearing the name Wang Guiqing. One solid swing was literally all it would take. "All right, here's the game plan," I whispered down to him, before sliding back to the ground. Xiao Zhuang walks into the yard wearing the corporate suit. This guard hates office drones, so he's going to aggro immediately, while his attention is fixed on the skeleton. You carry me right up behind him. I take my swing, he hits the deck. You dash inside to snatch the rope, and we both make a high-speed break for the bus, before our 10-minute timer runs out. Li Xiaoyu nodded without a single second of hesitation. For a guy who had been trembling like a leaf all night long, he locked in his courage shockingly fast. The second, a solid strategy, and a guaranteed prize were laid out on the table. Funny how that works. I turned my attention back to Xiao Zhang, who was standing right there in his ill-fitting, stolen business suit jacket, his jaw hanging slightly open, spectral flames flickering inside his eye sockets, like a pair of cheap birthday candles. Behold, my elite corporate infiltration squad. A skeleton wearing business casual. Head over there, I instructed him. Make sure the guard is facing you. Turn away from the back entrance and try to blend in. In response, he just clacked his jaw twice. I decided to take that as a confident yes. Xiao Zhang strutted toward the apartment gate, like a skeleton heading to a job interview, swinging his bony arms with way too much swagger. For a guy with zero muscles, I positioned Xiao Wang nearby to act as backup, my emergency reserve force, which is just a fancy name for the other pile of bones. I couldn't distinguish from the first guy. The plan kicked off without a hitch. Xiao Zhang grabbed the iron gate and began shaking it wildly, looking like a guy trying to crash a nightclub. Long after closing time, inside the guard booth, the TV glow illuminated the figure inside, revealing that this wasn't just some overweight guy, but a full-blown, pig-headed monster. Wang Guoqing caught the sound of the clanging, glanced up, and completely lost his mind. He locked eyes on a skeleton rocking a business suit, aggressively rattling his gait, and that bizarre mix of undead abomination, wearing office attire, pushed every single rage button in his massive body. All at once, he burst out of that booth, like a 400-pound tusked cannonball. When I finally got a clear look at him towering upright, my brain lagged for a second. 2 meters tall, 400 pounds, with a head twice the size of mine, stacked on top of each other, and coarse hair spiky enough to pass for steel needles. Yeah, this wasn't a mere security guard. This was a final boss that the developers accidentally spawned in the tutorial stage. Suddenly, that 10-pound wrench made complete sense. Anything lighter would have just bounced right off this beast, like a ping-pong ball hitting a brick wall. Li Xiaoyu dropped into a squat. I hopped onto his shoulders, and we launched our master stealth operation. 2 guys running a trenchcoat stack, sneaking up behind an unsuspecting pig monster, while wielding a weapon, fueled by 8 decades of pure, concentrated hatred. Peak covert operations right here, folks. By now, Wang Guoqing had snatched Xiao Zhang by the neck spine and hoisted him right off the pavement. So there my skeleton was dangling in midair, limbs flailing and jaw clicking away, 100% dedicated to his role as a distraction, even while being physically airlifted off the ground. The pig beast was grumbling about how rare skeletons were in these parts, saying he didn't want to provoke whatever undead army might come looking for this guy. Smart thinking, except he was completely wrong. My grand army consisted of exactly 1 other skeleton, and a military strategist, who was probably sitting back at base right now, writing diary entries estimating my odds of dying today. That's when Wang Guoqing spun around and caught us red-handed. Picture 2 dudes stacked on top of each other, with the guy on top raising a giant wrench, looking straight out of a Looney Tunes cartoon. So yeah, we were creeping up on this giant pig monster, in the single most ridiculous battle setup ever invented, only get caught red-handed. And why? Because I wanted to line up my hit, instead of just swinging away, haha. Well, this is awkward was all I could get out. Li Xiaoyu, who was holding me up, hissed from below. I told you to just swing, but no. You just had to take your sweet time aiming. Wang Guoqing slowly pointed 1 thick finger right at us, opening his mouth to spit out some big threat. And that was his fatal mistake. That split second of dramatic pointing and pausing handed me the exact opening I needed. Eat this, I yelled, swinging the wrench with all my power. It slammed straight into the middle of his forehead, and the second that metal made contact with his skull, things went completely insane. A massive burst of pitch-black energy erupted directly out of the wrench, as if it had been bottled up for 80 whole years, which, technically speaking, it actually was. Every single drop of the ball driver's rage, every sleepless night spent obsessing over that humiliation, and every revenge fantasy he ever had exploded all at once. The heavy wrench practically swung down on its own, yanking me along as it crushed Wang Guoqing's head. With terrifying strength, I literally heard bone crack. His eyes nearly popped out of his head, and this gigantic, 400-pound pig monster collapsed straight to his knees, with a massive crash that I could swear shook the ground under Li Xiaoyu's feet. The mighty, terrifying guard, the absolute nightmare of delivery drivers, was now begging on his knees, in front of 2 guys doing a piggyback ride. Karma had never looked so absurd. Meanwhile, back on the bus, though I didn't know this yet, the bald driver watched the whole thing and let out a scream. Yes, so incredibly loud that every passenger inside broke into a cold sweat. Turns out, settling his 80-year-old grudge. Literally made the guy level up. His spiritual chains shattered into pieces, sending a massive shockwave right through the bus. That weighed down on every ghost and player inside. Hey, good for him. Turns out aggressive revenge therapy actually works sometimes. I slapped the top of Li Xiaoyu's head. Drop me down and go grab the rope. Shaking off his shock, he quickly ducked, tossed me off his shoulders, and sprinted full speed toward the guard booth. I kept a safe distance from the kneeling pig guy and scanned the ground nearby. His stun baton was lying right next to him. 15 energy points, decent attack power, and a sweet chance to paralyze on hit. I swiped it and shoved it deep into my pocket, faster than I've ever snagged loot in my life. Then my greed took over. If his baton had that much power, the guard booth had to be packed with cursed items, just waiting to be looted, right? I dashed inside, only to find almost nothing. Just a couple of cheap trinkets sitting on the desk, with barely any energy at all. Total buzzkill. I really thought I was walking into a gold mine, looking like it came straight out of a spectral yard sales discount bin. Li Xiaoyu had managed to secure the hanging rope, though his choice of technique left a lot to be desired. The cursed item had basically wrapped itself around his neck, almost like it was desperately trying to fulfill its grim destiny. So there he was, standing with a literal noose around his throat, and an expression that practically screamed, "I have so many questions, but we don't have time for this. We gotta move," he urged. "Time's almost up." I quickly swiped the knickknacks off the desk. Hey, free loot is free loot, and bolted toward the exit. Suddenly, a massive shadow filled the doorway. It was Wang Wuqing, standing right there, clutching the sides of the frame with both hands. Thick black blood was streaming down his face straight from the gash in his skull, and his eyes were glowing with demonic red rage. Needless to say, he was very much awake. "Leaving so soon," he growled, completely blocking our escape route. "Where do you think you're going?" So much for the wrench's guaranteed knockout power. Turns out that guarantee had a very short expiration date, and it just ran out. 400 pounds of pure, enraged pig. Monster stood right between us and our ride out of here. Our 10-minute timer was ticking down fast, and the only weapon I had left was a stun baton that I hadn't even figured out how to switch on yet. The big pig woke back up. That pretty much sums up our life-threatening problem right there. One moment, I was looting his security booth, like some bargain bin treasure hunter, and the next second, 400 pounds of bleeding, furious pork was completely blocking the doorway, demanding to know where I thought I was going. His skull was split wide open, leaking pitch-black blood everywhere, and he looked 10 times angrier than before I smashed him. The 80-year revenge wrench, the ultimate weapon, custom-made to eradicate this exact monster, had bought us maybe 5 total seconds of sleep time. 5. That ball driver had miscalculated so horribly that if this were a math exam, Linnea's ghost student would have flunked him and eaten him twice over. I didn't stop to think. I didn't try to form a plan. I just leaped onto the desk, threw open the window, and hurled myself right out of it, looking like an extra auditioning for a low-budget action movie, where the main character has zero dignity left. It was pure parkour, fueled entirely by panic. I screamed at Li Xiaoyu to move his legs, and the poor guy snapped out of his terrified trance, just in time to dive out the window right behind me. Wang Wuqing lunged for us, but grabbed empty air, forced to double back through the door because, unlike me, there was no way his massive frame was fitting through a window. A small victory, but unfortunately, it only gave us about a 2-second head start, because that pig monster could move. 400 pounds, over 6 feet tall, yet he sprinted like someone half his size. His heavy footsteps pounding behind us sounded like a giant, beating war drums against the pavement, every single thud getting louder and dangerously closer. I glanced back over my shoulder and immediately regretted that decision. That hideous, monstrous pig face was closing the distance fast, black blood pouring down his forehead, tusks exposed, and glowing red eyes blazing with hatred. And to think the ball driver had swore to me that this guy probably hadn't gotten any stronger in 80 years. See, if he actually had any real ambition, he wouldn't still be working as a guard. But nope, the only reason he kept that job was because he genuinely enjoyed roughing people up at the gate, not because he was stuck without options. That blow from the wrench should have sent old Wang Wuqing straight into a coma for weeks. But this monster barely even felt a headache. Meanwhile, Li Xiaoyu was lagging behind. He'd been piggybacking me during our ambush, and now his legs were completely giving out. I could hear him gasping for air, his pace slowing down by the second, while the heavy footsteps behind us were closing in fast, right on his back. But right then, something incredible happened. The ghost rope wrapped around his neck suddenly came to life, turning itself into a literal sled dog leash. It jerked him forward with so much force that his feet were barely touching the pavement. Turns out, the rope wanted to get away from Wang Wuqing, just as badly as we did, maybe even more. It had been trapped in that guard post, under the pig man's command for so long, and this was its ultimate shot at freedom. So in less than half a second, Li Xiaoyu went from ready to pass out to getting dragged at breakneck speed by a possessed noose. He literally blasted right past me, eyes wide open, legs flailing wildly, towed along like a kite stuck in a hurricane. We were maybe 200 meters away from the bus. I could see it waiting in the distance, headlights beaming, engine purring. Just 200 meters between me and making it out alive. My legs were screaming in pain, my lungs burning like crazy, and that 10-pound wrench in my hand suddenly felt like 100 pounds. That's when I remembered Xiao Wang. My trump card, my emergency backup plan, the exact skeleton I had left hidden in the shadows. For a life-or-death moment, just like this, Xiao Wang blocked him. Instantly, Xiao Wang stepped out from behind the wall, took one look at this giant, enraged mountain of pork, charging right at us, and pulled off the absolute smartest play any skeleton has ever executed in the entire history of undead battles. He didn't bother fighting or trying to stand his ground. He straight up dove right under Wang Wuqing's feet like a unliving banana peel. The pig man didn't see it coming at all. His foot stepped right onto something hard and bony. His other foot tripped on another bone, and 400 pounds of pure fury security guard went airborne. In the most glorious wipeout I have ever seen in my life, he crashed down like a collapsing building, hitting the ground so violently I felt the earth shake beneath my feet, and ended up sprawled out on the pavement, surrounded by a cloud of dust and sheer anger. I glanced back and spotted Xiao Wang, or well, whatever was left of him. He'd been utterly pulverized by the crash, his body scattered across the ground, in a total mess of loose bones. Even so, one lone, detached hand was still raised, weakly waving at me to keep going. Go, boss. And right beside him, I noticed Xiao Zhang's leg, sticking out from right underneath Wang Wuqing's massive body. The poor guy had been clinging to the pig's back the entire chase, and now he was flattened completely underneath him. Crushed flat, my feet completely froze. These two absolute idiots, these clumsy, speechless, babbling piles of bones that I'd just met a few hours ago. They couldn't even speak. They could barely manage to follow basic orders. Honestly, their biggest achievement before today was playing peekaboo with some terrified teen on a bus. And yet, they had just thrown themselves into harm's way, literally dismantling their own bodies, just so I could reach safety. Xiao Wang turned himself into a speed bump, while Xiao Zhang acted as a crash mat. Neither of them hesitated for even a millisecond. I squeezed the wrench so tightly that my knuckles turned white. A part of me desperately wanted to turn back and swing that wrench until either that pig monster stopped breathing or I did, but doing that would completely waste their sacrifice. They didn't shatter themselves into pieces, just for me to pull off some heroically stupid stunt. They did it so I could actually live. So I turned, sprinted, and threw myself onto the bus. The door slammed shut right behind me. Inside, the bald driver was grinning from ear to ear. That strike was magnificent. I caught the entire thing. Mission accomplished. I am thoroughly satisfied. I got right in his face and snapped. Your intel was total trash. You claimed he probably hadn't gotten any stronger. I nearly lost my life. Because your 80-year-old information was completely wrong. My two soldiers literally fell apart out there to save me. His huge grin instantly vanished. He scratched his bald head, and actually had the decency to look genuinely embarrassed. He had witnessed the whole chase right from his window. Watched my skeletons sacrifice everything for me. Watched us barely escape with our lives, and he knew he had messed up big time. You're right, my bad. He muttered softly. Tell me how I can make this up to you. I honestly wasn't expecting that. I assumed he'd just throw out excuses, especially since his vendetta was already settled. Maybe finishing the job had actually raised his respect for me. Or maybe Ghost follows some code of honor that I just don't get. Either way, I wasn't about to waste this opportunity getting emotional. I held up the wrench, that 10-pound, 115 energy, grudge-infused weapon that had just cracked open a pig demon skull. This belongs to me now. The bald driver handed over the wrench, like it was nothing more than a used tissue. He didn't even hesitate, just flicked his wrist and said, sure, go ahead and take it. That was when it hit me. I had severely lowballed my bargaining power. This tool was completely useless to him now. It had been custom crafted to smash one specific pig, named Wang Wuqing, and that smashing was officially done. To him, it was just garbage. To me, though, it was 150 points of raw energy, packed into a solid, medium damage weapon, capable of actually harming supernatural entities. I had basically settled for his trash, and he was just relieved that I hadn't demanded something way more valuable. The sheer relief written across his bald, sunglass-wearing face made it crystal clear. I could have pushed for so much more. Lesson learned. Next time a spirit owes you a favor, always shoot higher. Just then, the mission complete notification flashed. And just like that, the fox fur blanket was officially mine. I snatched it off the wall with a single hand. The exact same blanket that refused to budge when I was putting all my strength into pulling it earlier. Turns out, a ghost property only moves when the ghost actually allows it. Boom, 100 points, simple as that. Riding high on the success of my little heist, I figured the driver's favorability towards me was basically maxed out. So I snuck in a question that had been driving me crazy. Why did some items radiate so much energy, while the guard's booth barely had any at all? The driver gave me a look like I'd just asked him why the sky was blue. Objects soak up energy from prolonged exposure to ghosts. That guard was a demon, not a ghost. Demons draw power from moonlight essence, a totally different energy system. So that's why the pigman's stash was completely dry. Different species, different power sources. Ghosts leave behind residue on everything they interact with, whereas demons don't. File that right away in my head. On evite survive right next to never lock eyes with anyone on haunted bus. I was preparing to head out when the driver stopped me. He paused for a brief moment, almost looking bashful, before handing me a pass. Not just any ordinary card. This was an all-access, free pass valid for every ghost bus out there, granting me the right to approach any spirit driver and ask for assistance. Sure, I'd still have to negotiate the price of that help, but the card itself was pure gold. Without it, these drivers wouldn't even spare you a glance. And considering that every ghost driver I'd run into was strong enough to send chills down the spine of literally every passenger on board, getting a VIP pass for their favors was like unlocking a premium membership in a mercenary guild. He admitted that. In all his years behind the wheel, I was the very first person to ever lend him a hand. I thanked him and called him uncle, but he quickly corrected me to call him big brother instead. Guess some truths hold up. Whether you're alive or dead, nobody likes feeling old. I found an open seat near the back and dumped my pack onto my lap to count up my haul. 5 seat covers at 15 points each. That's 75 points. The fox fur blanket, another 100. The revenge wrench, 150. That stolen stun baton, 50 more. Grand total, a whopping 375 energy points from a single run. Throw in the 200 bonus points for completing the mission. That universal bus pass, plus a spare container capable of holding 350 points of energy for later use. My domain was sitting on a 1,000 point debt, and at this rate, I'd be totally debt-free after just 2 or 3 more trips. From there, I could expand the territory, awaken more skeletons, and finally assemble the bone army of my dreams. The math was finally adding up. I laid everything out and began packing my bag neatly, just like a kid sorting Halloween loot by preference. Seat covers rolled up tight, blanket neatly folded, wrench tucked securely along the side. Stashed the nightstick right in my front pocket, and shoved all those odd trinkets from the guard booth into every nook and cranny. Literally every other player on this bus was just staring at me while I organized my haul of dirty, moldy, ghost-cursed trash, and they clearly thought I had completely lost my marbles. One guy even tried yanking on the seat fabric right beside him, found absolutely nothing special about it, and just gave up. He couldn't wrap his head around why I was hoarding bus seat covers, like pure gold, but they couldn't sense the hidden energy inside it. To them, I was just some total freak giggling over a pile of garbage. And you know what? Even if I knew what was going through their heads, I wouldn't have given a damn if collecting haunted junk was what it took to stay alive. In this nightmare game, I'd hoard cursed garbage with absolute pride and a huge grin on my face. Right then, the bus intercom crackled to life one last time. Next stop, terminal station. All passengers, please get ready to disembark. Don't forget to gather your personal belongings and pets. Pets on this cursed bus? Yeah, I figure it was best not to overthink that one. Meanwhile, in the back row, Lin Yu's head jerked up, like he'd just been hit with a high-voltage shock. The ghost student sitting beside him turned toward him with a downright terrifying grin. Hey, uncle, your time is almost up. Lin Ya basically told him where he could stick that countdown and went right back to scribbling furiously on his exam paper. He only had 2 big questions left, and his pen was moving so insanely fast. that I swear I could practically see smoke rising off the page. This guy was literally speedrunning a high school test, under the constant threat of getting devoured by a teenage ghost. And honestly, I had to respect the hustle. Li Xiaoyu was actually doing all right now. Ever since he retrieved that hanging noose, the ghost had finally stopped messing with him. Well, mostly stopped. The spirit was still dangling from the ceiling hand straps, and kept accidentally kicking Li Xiaoyu right in the head as its feet swung back and forth. Li Xiaoyu politely asked him to climb down, since they were right at the final stop, but the ghost just glared down at him with those bulging, bloodshot eyes and stayed completely silent. He clearly liked it up there. Li Xiaoyu just let out a sigh and accepted his fate as a literal footrest for Ghost. Meanwhile, Zhao Yixiao, the only guy who refused to take a single side quest, sat quietly in his seat, struggling with his internal crisis. He'd spent the whole ride paralyzed with fear because of my skeletons, only to realize they were totally harmless, which made him furious, then terrified all over again. And now that the dungeon was coming to an end, he was walking away with absolutely nothing to show for it, besides 10 lousy basic survival points, and enough mental trauma to keep a therapist busy for a decade. He kept shooting nervous glances my way, trying to figure out where my skeleton summons went. He had no idea they'd sacrificed themselves for me, or that they'd been shattered into pieces, just so I could escape that terrifying pig demon. He probably thought I just unsummoned them or something. A small part of me wanted to set the record straight, but honestly, I was way too exhausted to care, and far too preoccupied admiring my stash of loot to care. I kicked back, shut my eyes, and squeezed my bag stuffed with cursed relics. First dungeon, practically cleared. Debt clearance strategy, officially active. Skeleton body count, 2, temporary. Overall psychological toll, shockingly steep. For a guy who spent most of the trip stripping fabric off bus seats. Honestly, not bad for day one. Lenny wrapped up his supernatural homework, with roughly 2 minutes to spare, scoring an 80% on a high school test he hadn't touched in years. Completed. Under the literal threat of being devoured by teenage phantom, the ghost student grabbed the paper, with all the excitement of a guy getting handed a parking ticket, grunted a half-hearted thanks, and the quest paid out 50 points. Lenny wiped the sweat off his face, looking like a guy who just disarmed a bomb, using a butter knife. Meanwhile, there I was chilling in my seat, clutching a bag packed with haunted bus scraps, feeling like the wealthiest trash collector in the realm of the dead. The bus pulled into a pitch-black courtyard and came to a stop without a single warning. Both doors swung open, and the ball driver, whose name turned out to be Su Mao, grabbed his thermos and hopped off the front, looking like a tired worker clocking out. The ghost student shuffled out the back door, without looking back at anyone. The hanging ghost drifted out right behind him, giving Li Xiaoyu one last glare, probably debating whether to kick him in the face. One final time for old time's sake. Ultimately, he chose mercy. Character development. The dungeon completion system prompt flashed. For everyone, 10 base points. Head to the exit immediately. The view past the back exit morphed into a wall of dense, churning mist. Xiao Yishao shot me. The single most bitter glare I've ever gotten from a complete stranger, which was bizarre, considering I literally could not recall a single time we had ever spoken. Before vanishing right into the fog, Li Xiaoyu walked past and offered me a respectful nod. Hey, we fought side by side. So I nodded back, brothers in arms and piggybacking. He dragged himself out next, still gripping his pen, like a battle-worn soldier holding onto his rifle. I did one last sweep of the bus, for any remaining dark energy. Nothing left. I'd already picked this ride, cleaner than a Thanksgiving turkey bone. As I started heading for the back exit, Su Mao called out from the driver's seat. Hey, you seem like a decent kid. Here, take this, and tossed something straight at me. A filthy, oil-stained, sweat-drenched rag came flying through the air, right toward my face. My instant reaction was to dodge because I am not, in fact, a trash bin. But then, the item description popped up mid-air. With 100 energy points on the line, my reflexes kicked in, way before my self-respect could object. I snatched that nasty piece of cloth right mid-air, just like a star outfielder tracking a fly ball, shoving it straight into my pack without a second thought. Got any extra? I called out, completely unbothered. Get out of here, he chuckled back. Name's Su Mao. Gotcha later, Keith. He slipped out through the front entrance to steal a quick nap. Before his next shift, as I watched him leave, I couldn't help but think. Man's as bald as a cue ball, and hauls a bus full of freaks for a living. But hey, he's actually a solid guy. I strode into the mist, whistling a tune, sitting on a total of 475 energy points. way richer than when I first opened my eyes this morning, to sunlight piercing through my busted ceiling, and a cheat system that took 2 decades to show up. The haze parted, and just like that, I was back. My dilapidated stone courtyard, my weed-infested grounds, my very own empire of dirt and bones. Home sweet. Haunted home. But before I could even take it all in, that iconic sound of a pen scribbling furiously hit my ears. Ashwin was standing right there in front of me, taking notes like crazy, looking like a reporter camped out at the terminal, waiting for an A-list celebrity. I peeked over his shoulder to get a look, and he didn't even try to hide it. New Lord, Year 1. The master ventured into the nether realm for roughly 3 hours, returning unharmed with 0 visible wounds. Psychological state appears stable. First move upon arrival, snooping over my shoulder, proving his natural curiosity remains fully functional. Mental health status, double-checked and good. Backpack was completely empty upon departure, and packed to the brim upon return. Contents classified. This guy was literally documenting my autobiography in real time. Every step I took was recorded, every tiny detail logged. I couldn't tell if this was cute or low-key disturbing, but honestly, having a private biographer, who also doubled as my accountant, felt like the exact kind of perk a lord of the undead deserved. And then I heard it, that sweet, satisfying clatter of bony feet rattling on the stone floor. Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang came strutting across the plaza, right toward me, fully pieced back together. Fresh as new. Well, as fresh as a couple of skeletons could ever be, which isn't saying much. But they were whole, fully assembled and walking, instead of being scattered all over the pavement, underneath some giant pig demon's backside. Just like Ashwin had explained, skeletons always respawn in the graveyard, as long as they haven't been completely wiped out by sacred holy light, basically giving me infinite, immortal meat shields. My brain instantly started cooking up tactical battle plans. Throw them into the front lines first. Send them ahead as scouts to set off traps. Let them absorb all the damage while I flank from behind with my wrench. The strategic potential was insane. Disposable minions that just keep respawning indefinitely. I was practically buzzing with pure hype. Right then, Ashwin matter-of-factly broke the news that putting each skeleton back together costs 50 energy points a pop. Turns out, both of them used up the energy they'd harvested just to rebuild their own bodies, meaning that sweet 100-point loot from the bus was totally gone. My hype instantly popped like a balloon hitting a cactus. A 50-point price tag per revive meant I couldn't just brainlessly throw my squad into the meat grinder. Every move needed a budget now. Turns out even running an undead army requires basic economics. But as I ran the numbers again, a realization hit me. I'd already written off those 100 points anyway. During that chaotic getaway, I assumed that energy was a total loss. The second they got smashed into pieces. So technically speaking, I was right on track. No net energy gain, but 2 fully functional soldiers back on their feet. In my book, that's an absolute win. I swung my heavy bag off my back and started dumping out the loot. Ashwin watched in utter silence as I pulled out car seat covers, a fox fur blanket, a greasy old wrench, a stun baton, random office trinkets, a dirty rag, and an empty plastic bottle. The crazy part? Every single item leaked so much dark energy that the air around my bag literally condensed into a thick, visible black mist. Turning to Ashwin, I asked how we were supposed to drain the energy from all this junk. He just stood there, dead silent. I called his name again. Still no response. I glanced up and saw a look I never thought was possible. Pure, unadulterated shock on a face with no skin, no facial muscles, and 0 physical ability to express emotion. Yet somehow, through sheer, overwhelming disbelief, Ashwin's bare skull was practically radiating total astonishment. His jaw was practically unhinged, hanging lower than usual, while the soul fires in his eyes flared up like crazy. He was completely rendered speechless. And keep in mind, this skeleton literally never shuts up. Fumbling out his trusty journal, he began, scribbling furiously with an intensity I'd never seen from him before. Peeking over his shoulder, I caught his latest entry. Estimated energy haul, easily exceeding 300 points. Visible fog density inside the container. In all the generations of lords before, this marks the very first time a lord has ever returned from their maiden run into the Shadow Realm with a bounty of this magnitude. Note, the skeleton crypt may finally be reclaiming its former glory. Those words, former glory, seem to echo in the silence between us. This run-down territory of mine, full of crumbled ruins, dormant skeletons, and energy reserves running on empty, It used to be something legendary, a true powerhouse. And here was my undead record keeper, a guy who'd outlasted ruler after ruler, watching every single one march into the abyss, never to return. He documented all their grim failures and bloody ends in that exact notebook, written in the same neat handwriting. Yet for the first time in God knows how many centuries, he actually wrote down the word glory without immediately scratching it out. I glanced over at my mountain of cursed trash, my two freshly patched up skeletal minions, and my completely dumbfounded strategist. I couldn't help but smirk. We were just getting warmed up, right here, in my glorious dump of a kingdom. I headed after Ashwin toward the throne room, just to figure out how to cash in all this loot. Honestly, I was expecting some grand ancient ritual, maybe a blood sacrifice, a chanting circle, or even some weird interpretive dance, performed by a bunch of skeletons under the moonlight. Nope, you literally just sit on the throne and think. The word extract, that's literally it. This whole mystical energy conversion system was basically just a psychic ATM. The throne started glowing, and this thick black mist was sucked right out of my backpack, like some kind of supernatural vacuum cleaner. Then, a fresh number popped up on my interface. 375 energy deposited. Remaining balance on my 1,000-point death sentence mortgage. 625. Not half bad for a guy whose entire financial game plan was ripping off bus seat covers. The catch? The second that energy was drained, every single one of my precious, haunted collectibles turned back into literal trash. The seat cushions were just filthy seat cushions again. The fox fur blanket reverted to a gross, moldy rag, and the cloth was just useless fabric. The magic was gone. So I dumped the covers and blanket onto Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang, who immediately began wrapping themselves up in them, like a pair of bony skeleton burritos. At least, the wrench and electrobaton kept their weapon stats. Only their energy coating had been stripped away. Those were going straight back into the bag as legitimate gear, because even a scavenger needs a way to protect himself. Now came the real moment of truth. What was I actually going to do with 375 points? My immediate gut reaction was to throw every penny toward paying off my debt, just to get that ticking death clock off my back. Ashwin strongly advised me to do just that, showing all the passionate devotion of an accountant who takes financial responsibility way too seriously. But then I pulled up the upgrade tree, and I spotted a game changer. My dried up well. That pathetic little structure generating a measly 20 energy a day could actually be upgraded to level 2 for 200 points. And at level 2, it would crank out 50 points daily, which meant it would fully cover our domain's daily upkeep costs, instead of us losing 30 points every single day. The main hall could be upgraded too for 500 points, unlocking a training facility where I could refine my own body, using energy. Definitely tempting, but way out of my price range right now. Upgrading the well was the obvious no-brainer. Stop the financial bleeding first, worry about the loan later. If I left the well at level 1, I just keep digging myself into a deeper hole every day, even if I was actively grinding. Upgrade it, though, and at least the territory stops bleeding us dry. It was basic economics 101, the kind of basic logic literally anyone should see in a heartbeat, which made me wonder why Ashwin, my supposed brilliant military strategist, hadn't brought this up in the first place. I slowly turned toward him, with what I hoped was a deeply suspicious look, though honestly, I'm not sure how threatening I actually looked, as he perches on a battered rock seat, clutching an oily spanner. If boosting the spring is obviously smarter than throwing every cent at our balance, why didn't you just say that earlier? The bony guy straight up bent in half, groveling. My master, my devotion is total and unshakable. Then he dives into a massive lecture explaining that sure, upgrading the well gives us a quick boost, but even with 50 energy points a day, the domain's trio of skeletons still gobble up 20 points daily, just to stay functional, leaving a pathetic 30-point profit. And with a massive 1,000-point debt looming over us, the main focus should really be raking in profits, from dungeons to wipe out the debt completely, allowing our territory to finally expand and construct new facilities. And honestly, he had a point, an incredibly frustrating, mathematically rock-solid point. Hold on, 20 points daily for 3 skeletal dudes? I thought the daily base cost was 50. As one broke down, that 50 was purely for territory upkeep, and the skeleton drain was an extra fee on top of it. He, along with the 2 guards, required 20 extra points shared among them, simply to keep from going permanently dormant, meaning our real daily expense wasn't 50 at all. It was 70. 70 freaking points every single day. My fountain generated 20, which meant I was bleeding 50 points a day. Just by standing around, I slumped on my throne and stared blankly at the sky, gaping through the massive holes in my ceiling, as the absolute nightmare of my economic situation finally sunk into my brain. This wasn't just a basic loan. This was a full-on cursed, supernatural, skeleton-fuel home loan, piling on compounding interest, where defaulting literally means execution. And things were about to get way worse, because down the line, I'd have to awaken additional skeletons to clear tougher dungeons. More skeletons meant higher daily upkeep. Higher upkeep meant I needed more energy income. Earning more energy required tackling harder dungeons. And harder dungeons required summoning even more skeletons. The cycle was relentless. I was basically caught in a scheme, engineered by reality itself, where the item being traded was my own damn life. No matter how I calculated it, the math brought me to the same harsh truth. I would never, ever secure enough energy. It didn't matter how many seat fabrics I salvaged, how many swine monsters I blew up, or how many phantom drivers chucked filthy rags right in my face. The bills would constantly scale up to swallow my earnings. I was trapped spending the rest of my days in this creepy game, desperately farming ectoplasm, just to keep the power running. In a graveyard packed with starving boneheads, who would literally crumble into dust without their daily energy fix. Then, as one offhandedly dropped another bomb, Little Zhang and Little Wong weren't even running at top condition. At peak performance, a single bone warrior demands 20 points daily, on his own. Right now, my two guards were scraping by on a combined 5, all because this domain was way too broke to feed them proper meals. These guys were literally skeletal troops running on empty. Their terrible combat performance back in the dungeon, the awkward flailing, the sluggish reaction time, and getting grabbed by the throat like that wasn't lack of skill, it was pure starvation. If I ever actually buffed them to maximum power, it would cost me 40 points every single day, just to keep 2 low-tier foot soldiers active. Throw in Ashwin and the general territory maintenance, and I'd be burning through over 100 points each day before I even had breakfast. I leaned back against my throne, closed my eyes, and let out a deep, heavy sigh that honestly could have given that well a run for its money. 20 long years waiting to unlock a cheat system, and when I finally got one, it came with 1,000 points of debt, a falling apart realm, 3 half-starved skeletons, and a financial system that felt completely rigged, just to trap me on an endless hamster wheel forever. The system didn't give me an easy shortcut to God mode. It handed me a struggling small business with terrible margins, and workers who literally ate up all the profits. And somehow, despite this absolute disaster, Ashwin had written down in his journal that the skeleton crypt might actually be reclaiming its former glory. Glory, huh? Right. Ask me that again after I figure out how to afford lunch for my grand army of 3. All right, enough stressing over undead economics. This domain was mine now, like it or not. I was trapped in a dark fantasy game with no way back, and this rundown graveyard was the only property to my name. Time to stop complaining and start grinding. I smoothly dodged having to admit that I'd totally accused Ashwin of betrayal, literally about 2 minutes ago. You really should have clarified that sooner, I said with the utter confidence of a guy who was totally deflecting his own mistake. Meanwhile, Ashwin, showing off the elite diplomatic skills of a skeleton who had outlasted multiple lords, bowed low and claimed it was completely his fault for not explaining it better. We both knew what actually happened. Neither of us called it out. And just like that, a beautiful workplace dynamic was born. I decided to upgrade the well first. The next dungeon run wasn't for another 3 days. And if I dumped 200 points into the well right now, the boosted resource output would cover the territory's daily upkeep costs. Moving forward, that meant for the next 3 days, I'd only be paying for the skeleton crew's personal upkeep, instead of bleeding out the full 70 points daily. Simple math. The exact kind Ashwin was trying to get through my head. Right before I tried to accuse him of treason, we walked back over to the well, still looking like the same pathetic little setup, complete with its shaky wooden cover, standing right in the middle of my weed-filled courtyard, like a cheap garden decoration that had completely given up on life. The mysterious entity inside the well was apparently taking a nap, since nobody did a dramatic breathing impression at me this time. Thank God for small miracles. I opened up the menu and hit upgrade. 200 points vanished from my balance in an instant, which honestly hurt my soul, even if the currency was basically phantom fumes, harvested from stolen bus seats. Suddenly, A thick fog burst around the well, completely swallowing it whole. From deep inside the mist came a chaotic noise of construction hammering and clanking, sounding like a skeleton who accidentally dropped a wooden board right onto another skeleton's foot. The entire remodel took barely 5 minutes, which was definitely faster than any contractor I'd ever dealt with. In either realm, as the mist lifted, I could barely recognize the spot. The well had transformed from a pathetic hole in the dirt with a twig on top into an actual building. The makeshift canopy had doubled in size, gaining 3 solid wooden walls that made it look like a legit room, leaving just one open side facing the main path. 2 massive water reservoirs sat on both sides of the room. The well opening itself had grown much wider and was now fitted with a proper hand-crank pulley system to pull up water. It actually looked like a piece of an actual civilization rather than a post-apocalyptic flea market. I walked over and took a peek inside the upgraded well, fully expecting the same dull, gray mist as before. Instead, I saw something that made my brain freeze. Water. Actual. Honest-to-God clear, reflecting water resting at the bottom. Not fog, not phantom fluid, and not some sketchy magical liquid either. Just pure water where I could clearly see my reflection. The pit that had been labeled as a dried-up well, since before I was even born, was now full of water. The system pop-up confirmed it. Dried-up well LV1, successfully upgraded to well house LV2. Daily generation, 50 points. Added perk, drinkable well water. They even rebranded the place. It was no longer just a dried-up hole. It was now an official well house. My worst asset. Just got a full promotion and a brand overhaul. All at once. But hold on a second. Drinkable water for who exactly? I turned to Ajun and asked, since when do skeletons drink water? He confirmed this had never happened before. When previous lords upgraded the well, it only increased their generation, without any water. His theory was that the territory adapted itself, simply because I was a living human who needed hydration. The system had detected my human needs and tailored the upgrade specifically for me. Talk about custom service. Getting VIP treatment from a haunted estate? Honestly, my undead real estate was way more considerate than most landlords. Back in the real world, I ordered Xiao Zhang to pull up a bucket so I could give my new perk a proper taste test. He grabbed hold of the crank and started spinning it with full enthusiasm, his bones rattling along with every full turn, creating a squeaky soundtrack that echoed across the deserted courtyard. The bucket came back completely full, and he dumped it right into one of the storage tanks. I scooped up a bit with the ladle and took a small sip, crisp and refreshing, with a surprisingly sweet aftertaste. Honestly, it tasted way better than the tap water I used to drink back in the real world. I was just about to tell Ashwin how good it was, before it clicked that he's literally a skeleton and has no taste buds. Awkward. Right on cue, another heavy sigh echoed from the well. That same deep, weary, dramatic breath floating up from down below. I leaned in and listened closely. No gurgling at all, which meant whatever was lurking down there wasn't actually floating in my fresh drinking water. It was basically just coexisting down there. Hey, as long as my mysterious underground tenant wasn't ruining my water supply, we could stay strict, don't ask, don't tell roommates. Now, looking at my account balance after the upgrade, I was sitting on 175 points. Out of that, I had to set aside 3 days worth of skeleton snacks, 20 points a day to keep Ashwin and the boys fed. That meant 60 points were wiped out before the next dungeon even began. I decided to dump another 100 points into my debt repayment, just to chip away at that scary 4-digit number. Watching my debt drop from 1,000 to 900 felt exactly like making a minimum credit card payment. Technically progress, but emotionally useless. My remaining balance? A grand total of 15 points. Yep, broke again. The vicious cycle of ghost poverty continues. Right then, my stomach let out a loud growl. In the middle of all the hype over extracting energy, base upgrades, and managing finances for my skeleton army, I'd completely forgotten one minor detail. I'm still a living human who actually needs food to survive. I immediately ordered Xiao Wang to go gather firewood from the mountain. He tilted his skull in pure confusion, having zero clue what fire was even used for, but dutifully jogged off anyway. Next, I instructed Xiao Zhang to fill up the water tank and haul it straight to the main hall, saving me from walking outside every single time I got thirsty. Back inside the throne room, I unzipped my backpack and pulled out a pack of instant noodles. Pure salvation. All I needed was to boil some water and wait. Oh no, I didn't have a pot. I frantically searched the entire hall, but found nothing. Not a single cooking pot or pan existed in this whole territory. Ashwin broke the news to me that none of the previous lords had ever needed to eat, being skeletal beings and all. So naturally, the blacksmith had never bothered to forge a single piece of kitchenware. I was officially the very first living lord in this realm, and nobody had thought to stock a kitchen for me. For one terrifying moment, I legitimately began to wonder if I was about to become the first lord in the history of the skeleton tomb to die, not from a deadly dungeon boss, not from crushing energy debt, but from sheer starvation, killed by a total lack of cookware. My tombstone would literally read, had an army, had a throne, but didn't have a pot. Just then, Ashwin gently reminded me that dungeon points could actually be spent. In the horror game shop, I slapped my thighs so hard that the sound echoed off the stone walls. The shop, I had earned 210 points in total, and I'd been so hyper-focused on energy, I had completely forgotten that this game even had an in-game shop. I pulled up the marketplace menu and began browsing through pots, pans, grains, canned goods, and blankets, clothing, and soap. Everything was dirt cheap. Sure, the horror game was constantly trying to end my life at every turn. But hey, at least the grocery prices were remarkably low. It turns out even interdimensional death gauntlets are smart enough to realize you can't properly terrify someone who's starving to death. Browsing the horror game shop was easily the most absurd shopping experience I had ever had across either of my lives. Literally, anything unrelated to battle was practically free. A single point got you a full outdoor survival kit, tents, sleeping bag, à portable, stove, cooking pots, skillets, dishes, and eating utensils. Another single point scored 2 tons of fresh veggies. 1 point bought 2 tons of raw meat. And just 1 point got me 10 kilograms of solid gold. If there was a way to smuggle these goods back to the real world, I'd instantly become the wealthiest man on Earth. The only problem was that surviving this place was the only way out, and that was looking like a very expensive endeavor. I went ahead and grabbed the survival gear, the kitchenware, the bulk food, and a set of spices. The grand total was a mere 5 points. 5 points for enough kitchen equipment and raw ingredients to launch an entire restaurant. Meanwhile, a basic steel blade in the combat tab cost 5 points all on its own. The horror game's economic logic was painfully clear. Basic survival costs next to nothing, but staying armed to fight back will drain you dry. They wanted you fully rested and well-fed, right up until the moment a monster devours you. The shop even featured a built-in inventory storage system, which was remarkably convenient for a game literally designed to torment its players. Any food stored inside would stay fresh forever. Time completely stood still in the inventory, meaning I could buy 2 tons of pork and pull out a single pork chop whenever I felt hungry, without ever worrying about the rest spoiling. My domain had gone from a total desolate wasteland to an endless, perfectly preserved supermarket. In a matter of 30 seconds, I summoned the kitchenware, and it immediately spawned right into the throne room, crashing onto the stone floor from half a meter above. Pots, pans, a burner stove, cutting boards, and ladles. A whole restaurant's worth of supplies came clattering across the ancient stone floor tiles. Ashwin practically jumped out of his skin from the sudden noise, so I put him on sorting duty right away. Master military strategist, royal historian, and now official warehouse supervisor. The guy certainly wore a lot of hats. Well, not literal hats, considering he had no skin on his head to hold one, but figuratively speaking. He was an incredibly versatile worker, with our basic survival gear, all taken care of for a laughable 5 points. I still had 205 points left, burning a hole in my non-existent pocket. It was time to shop for gear that could actually keep me alive in the upcoming dungeons. I clicked over to the weapons and skills section, and the cost of everything hit me right away. The prices were ridiculously high when you compared them to basic survival items. A simple steel sword ran you 5 points. Decent abilities started at 50 and only climbed higher, while the truly powerful ones cost hundreds. Looking at the numbers revealed a harsh reality that I really should have picked up on sooner. Clearing the basic dungeon survival quest gave you a meager 10 points. Those 10 points could only net you 2 steel knives and nothing more. No skills, no defensive gear, and 0 gear upgrades if you just stuck to the bare minimum quest. You'd be trapped using low-tier starter equipment. Even as the dungeons kept getting progressively more brutal, you might survive too. Maybe 3 runs at most before a monster ended you. This horror game wasn't just tough. It was intentionally designed to push you into taking massive risks. Those extra side quests with the bigger payouts were far from optional content. They were literally the only way to actually stay alive. The basic mission was nothing but a death trap wrapped in a false sense of security. Every single player who tried to play it safe was unknowingly setting themselves up for a slow, inevitable demise. It was brutal, clever, and straight-up evil game design. I started scrolling through the skill list, searching for something that would mesh well with my skeletal squad. If my whole combat style revolved around leading undead minions, then the smartest move was to buff those minions up instead of wasting points trying to make myself slightly less useless in a fight. After filtering the list and looking around for a bit, I spotted the perfect skill. War Frenzy, priced at 150 points. Its effect put the target into a furious berserk state, granting a major boost to strength, speed, and overall size for 3 full minutes. Once the duration ran out, the target would suffer extreme fatigue for 30 minutes. It even granted a bonus magic power stat of 100 points, just to help fuel the activation. 3 minutes of pure, unstoppable skeleton destruction, followed by half an hour of total debuff. On paper, that penalty seemed pretty harsh, having your frontline fighter rendered useless for 30 minutes. After every fight was a massive drawback, except my fighters were literal skeletons. Skeletons don't feel fatigue. They don't have muscle tissue to tire out, no lungs to lose breath, and no stamina gauge to run dry. The entire flaw of this ability was built around the physical limitations of living creatures. Limitations my summons didn't have at all. It was like finding an overpowered weapon whose downside was inflicting severe sunburns and giving it to skinless creatures who live deep underground. It was completely meaningless to them. Still, I wanted to double-check before spending 150 hard-earned points. Acting on a hunch, I called over to Ashvin, who was meticulously stacking pots against the wall, with the laser focus of someone constructing a historic monument. "Hey Ashvin, do you ever get exhausted?" He froze instantly, his entire bony frame locking up. He slowly pulled himself up to his full height, which wasn't particularly imposing, considering he was just an average-sized skeleton, and turned to look at me with an intense gaze that felt way too dramatic for a simple question. The fiery glow in his eye sockets flared up intensely, his jaw tightening with pure resolve. And when he finally spoke, his voice echoed with the deep weight of an ancient soul, tasting genuine sympathy for the very first time. "My lord, skeletons are completely immune to exhaustion," he declared, as if taking a sacred life and death pledge. Like I just asked if he was ready to lay down his life for me, and he was pouring his entire spirit into the response. "Bro, I literally just wanted to check if the side effects of a buff spell would even affect a walking pile of bones." Yet this relic of a skeleton completely misconstrued it as me showing genuine concern for him. Turns out, not a single master before me had ever bothered to ask how he was holding up. A whole millennium of loyal service under multiple commanders, and not a single one had ever checked in with a simple, "Hey, you doing all right?" The standards for skeleton employee satisfaction were practically 6 feet under, and I had somehow stumbled right over them completely by mistake. Having no clue what emotional minefield I had just triggered, I just gave him a casual nod. "Cool. Good to know. Back to cleaning. At once, my lord." He practically gave a military salute using a frying pan. So I went ahead and bought War Frenzy, and the skill instantly equipped to my loadout, right alongside my original 2 traits. Plus, a brand new mana stat popped up on my status screen, sitting at 100 points, which gave me just enough juice for 5 casts before running dry. Using the remaining 50 points, I managed to snag a discount knife, a short blade styled pretty closely to a Tang Dao. Nothing fancy, 0 special attributes. Totally useless against intangible spirits, but plenty effective against flesh and blood monsters, like that pig demon, all for just 5 points. I also picked up a Blessed Jade Charm, for 15 points, capable of tanking a single mid-tier attack. Basically a one-time emergency shield I could wear around my neck. Sure, it wasn't flashy, but in a lethal survival game like this, blocking just one fatal hit is the difference between making it out and becoming just another corpse in the floorboards. After wrapping up my shopping spree, I was down to 35 points. Not really enough to buy anything game-changing, so I saved the rest for a rainy day emergency fund. Reaching into my pocket dimension inventory, a free bonus reward for beating the tutorial stage, roughly the capacity of a shoebox. I pulled out that bargain short sword and gave it a few practice swings. Felt surprisingly solid, light, sharp, well-balanced. I didn't actually know any real sword techniques, meaning my battle strategy was basically going to boil down to swinging as hard as I could and praying for a hit. Still, at least I had an upgrade over a heavy wrench. whenever a situation called for actual precision. Now, it was time to test War Frenzy on Alive. Well, Undead, Guinea Pig, and Ashwin was right there, huffing and puffing, just trying to drag an empty grill frame across the room. For a high-level Undead Grand Strategist, his physical attributes were laughably tragic. Literally the ultimate test dummy. Bah Frenzy. I activated the skill out of nowhere, blasting a surge of crimson aura straight into Ashwin from behind. A burst of fiery crimson energy exploded straight from his bones. His skeleton shot up, instantly adding almost 8 inches to his height. His shoulders broadened out, and his skeletal frame grew noticeably thicker. Those dim blue ghost flames inside his eye sockets flared up intensely and turned into an aggressive, fiery red. That heavy grill he'd been struggling so hard to haul around suddenly felt light as a feather in his grip. He spun right around, raising the grill like a makeshift weapon, ready to smash whatever had just hit him out of nowhere, only to spot me standing there with a massive, goofy smirk on my face. "So how's that feel?" I smirked. He slowly lowered the grill back down, those ghostly flames in his eyes still blazing bright red. "Was that your doing, my lord? I feel absolutely incredible. My raw strength just took a massive jump. My senses feel way sharper, and even my ability to sense mana has leveled up." I took a good look at my skeletal tactician, now nearly 8 inches taller, glowing with red light, and actually giving off a legit, terrifying vibe, for the very first time since I summoned him. And I immediately started doing the math in my head. If a simple buff like this could turn a scrawny little bone caster into a total powerhouse, just imagine what it would do when slapped on a Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang. At maximum output, 3 whole minutes of pure, supercharged skeleton destruction, with absolutely 0 debuffs or exhaustion afterward. Combine that with their endless revive mechanic, and my passive that keeps me off everyone's hit list, and I was accidentally crafting a seriously broken setup. This twisted horror game handed me a massive debt, a pathetic dump of a kingdom, and 3 starving skeletons. But I was fully set on turning this place into a dominant empire. Though before all that, I really had to figure out how to cook a simple pot of ramen on a cheap stove, without accidentally blowing up my only base. A zhuang set the grill down in the corner effortlessly, acting like it was light as a feather, and walked right back over to me, his red aura pulsing with pure energy cracking off his bones. He cracked his skeletal knuckles back and forth, a move that honestly would have looked pretty slick on someone who actually had skin and muscle and delivered his combat assessment. My physical strength has easily doubled, and my movement speed has taken a major leap as well, though the size increase doesn't seem to offer much practical combat advantage, other than just making me physically bigger. Now that's solid data for my test dummy. The skill delivered exactly what the description promised. The only real drawback was the flashiness. Zhuang was practically glowing, like a walking skeleton Christmas tree. Anyone with working eyes could tell from a mile away that he was heavily buffed. Stealth was definitely not a feature of this ability, but considering the insane power boost it gave, a little extra glow was a cosmetic flaw I was more than happy to ignore. Now came the moment of truth. The aftermath. I needed to see what would go down the second that 3-minute timer ticked to 0. If skeletons somehow still got hit with the fatigue penalty, then spending 150 points on this skill will be way less broken than I hoped. So I stood there, staring intently at Zhuang, waiting. And Zhuang just stood right there staring back at me, probably wondering why his master was analyzing him. Like a lab rat. Neither of us said a word, just 2 beings waiting out the clock. So there we were, a lone living guy and a millennium-old skeleton, locked in literally the most awkward, staring contest ever. All while a magic stat boost slowly ran out. Off in the background, a campfire crackled softly, and the wind whistled right through my ruined roof. Just a bone strategist and his new boss standing there, vibing in total silence. True peak leadership. As the crimson aura faded, Ashwin shrank back to his normal size, his eye flames shifting from red right back to their usual blue, and I jumped on him instantly. "How are you feeling? Anything weird? Feeling drained, slow, heavy, or sleepy? Anything at all?" He stopped for a second, genuinely assessing his own condition, like a guy getting a routine checkup. "Nothing out of the ordinary, my lord." There was a bit of minor discomfort from that sudden surge in power, but absolutely nothing like exhaustion. Yes, I literally pumped my fist in the air. The debuff. The whole reason this skill was sold for cheap at 150 points, instead of a massive 500, was totally meaningless when used on skeletal minions. Using War Frenzy on a human soldier gave them 3 minutes of God mode, followed by half an hour of being a completely useless, exhausted wreck. But war frenzy on a skeleton? 3 minutes of pure power, followed by literally nothing at all. No downsides, no penalties, and no cooldown that actually mattered. I just snagged a top-tier combat skill at a bargain price, simply because the devs never even considered that a player would cast it on undead units that physically lack the ability to feel tired. And then, my mind took a turn into a much darker place. A far more glorious, terrifying place. If skeletons never get exhausted, don't eat food, never sleep or rest, and work for literally nothing, besides a daily recharge of mana, then I didn't just have a private army. I was looking at the most insane, hyper-efficient workforce in the entire history of the world. Non-stop 24/7 shifts, zero complaints. No worker unions, no lunch breaks, and zero HR headaches. Just point at a job and they'll grind until the literal end of the universe, or until their bones crumble into dust, whichever happens first. Heck, even breaking apart was just temporary, since they just respawn good as new back in the graveyard. I was essentially setting up an undead sweatshop, and honestly, I felt zero guilt about it. The only thing throwing cold water on my hype was the sudden, harsh realization that I had literally zero work for them to actually do. My land was completely barren. No crops to farm, no mines to excavate, and no walls to build. My tireless, immortal crew was currently qualified for a whopping 3 things: hauling stuff around, standing there like props, and scaring the living daylights out of random humans. Sure, the infrastructure would come eventually, but right now, having a staff that never rests felt like having a high-end supercar with nowhere to drive it. That's when a major strategic realization hit me. As I was checking out the shop earlier, a ton of overpowered abilities came with brutal negative effects like curses, rapid health drain, temporary blindness, and crippling pain feedback, stuff that would completely ruin a regular player. Except skeletons don't register pain, don't actually have a standard health bar, and don't even have eyes to go blind with. Literally half the debuffs in the entire game's skill catalog were completely irrelevant to undead minions, which meant I could deliberately hunt down god tier, massively discounted abilities that everyone else avoided due to their insane penalties, and slap them straight onto my skeletons with zero drawbacks. War Frenzy was really just the tip of the iceberg, a comparable buff that didn't feature a side effect, like Bloodlust. Ran for a whopping 500 points, yet I practically snagged the same effect for just 150. This skeleton loophole was going to save me absolute millions. I mentally labeled this tactic as exploit relentlessly and ordered Ashuin to get back to sorting everything out. He gave a bow and returned to his work with a whole new level of energy. Now, whether that extra energy was from the leftover buff or his misguided belief that I'd asked about his well-being, out of genuine care, I decided not to dig into it. Using what was left of my points, I picked up a short blade, a budget knife resembling a compact Tang Dao. Cost me 5 points with no special abilities. Totally useless against specters, but more than capable of stabbing anything made of actual flesh and blood. I also grabbed a Blessed Jade pendant for 15 points, a single-use barrier capable of tanking one. Mid-tier attack, nothing fancy, but in a death game, where a single cheap shot could mean instant game over. Wearing an extra life insurance policy around my neck seemed totally worth every penny. That left me with exactly 35 points in the bank. Hardly enough to buy anything significant, so I held on to them for emergencies. The horror system had also rewarded me with a storage space for beating that first dungeon, though calling it a space is being extremely generous. It was pretty much the size of a standard shoebox. I shoved the knife in there and it was instantly full. The jade pendant went right around my neck, while the pipe wrench and nightstick stayed inside my backpack. My whole gear setup could literally fit inside a school bag, with plenty of room left over for instant ramen. Genuinely terrifying when suddenly bone-deep exhaustion hit me like a semi-truck. I'd been awake ever since that beam of light shot right through my bedroom ceiling. 5701:49:53 566 01:49:55 633 got dragged straight into a brutal survival game. Built a functioning skeletal empire, stripped a city bus clean, fought a monstrous pig demon, cut deals with vengeful spirits, and completely restructured my domain's economy. My body was completely spent, so I pulled out the sleeping bag from my starter gear, rolled it out right there on the throne room floor, and zipped myself in like a caterpillar, retreating into its cocoon. I instructed Ashuin to wake me the moment the other two wrapped up their assignments. And just like that, I passed out cold, Fast forward 3 hours later. I open my eyes only to find 3 bare skull faces, staring down directly at me. Imagine waking up to 6 glowing blue flames glaring directly into your soul, from literally 8 inches away. My high-pitched scream echoed off every single stone wall in this palace. Dude, what did I tell you about invading my personal space when I wake up? Ashwin bowed in apology and quickly ushered the other 2 back a few paces. Once my heart rate dropped back down from near-fatal levels, I finally noticed the entire throne room looked completely transformed. The floor had been swept spotless. All the stray rubble was gone, and tools were neatly lined up against the wall. Kitchen gear was organized nicely on a stone slab. A fresh stack of firewood sat tucked in the corner, and a water reservoir was set up right where I needed it. And right in the middle of the room, a crackling campfire, already fully prepped and hot enough to cook. Bro, I just told them to put away a few tools, and they went ahead and renovated my entire living space. Apparently, Ashwin decided that the second I fell asleep, my don't take initiative rule was officially void. He'd rallied Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang into a full-blown extreme cleaning crew, deep scrubbing the palace from the dusty floor to the ruined ceiling. For the very first time since I got summoned here, this throne room actually felt like a place a real human could live in, rather than a depressing dungeon, where you go to contemplate all your terrible life choices. Wait, how long was I out? 3 hours. My lord, 3 hours. 3 skeletons, absolutely 0 breaks. They work completely nonstop, mostly because they literally lack the physical capability to get tired. And honestly, the final result was insane. I looked around the spotless room, taking in the sorted supplies and the roaring fire, and just nodded. Seriously, good job, guys. Hearing that, Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang immediately launched into their signature victory ritual, flailing their arms wild and clacking their jawbones together, busting out what I can only describe as the ultimate skeleton victory dance. Ashwin, on the other hand, gave a dignified bow, humbly murmuring that he was merely fulfilling his duties, though I'm pretty sure his notebook would tell a completely different story. Right on cue, my stomach cut through the cozy vibe, with a monstrous growl that rattled off every single wall. 10 whole hours without food. I pointed over to the pot, and Xiao Zhang already had it set over the fire rack. Before I could even finish my sentence, I poured in some fresh well water, ripped open a packet of cheap instant noodles, and tossed it right in. Within minutes, the ancient stone throne room of this skeletal tomb was completely filled with the glorious, wonderfully out-of-place aroma of MSG-heavy beef ramen. So there I was, sitting by the fire, happily slurping noodle from a bowl, completely surrounded by 3 bone-dry skeletons, who were watching me eat, with the absolute fascination of creatures who had never once in their immortal lives understood what the hell hunger even felt like. The warm campfire cast dancing shadows across their bare bones. Outside, the murky gray sky faded quickly into night, while inside, a human overlord was sitting on the floor of a ruined palace eating dollar noodles, surrounded by his undead squad sitting in a perfect little semicircle around him, looking like a bunch of toddlers at story time. Had someone randomly strolled in right then, they would have been completely clueless about what was happening. To be real, I was just as clueless, but the noodles hit the spot. The campfire was cozy, and for once, ever since dropping into this realm of debt and skeletons, I felt a comforting sense of home. When we finished eating, I sat beside the fire with Ashwin and brought up the burning question on my mind, ever since I stepped foot in this dump. So what took place here? How did this realm end up looking like a half-finished demolition project? Ashwin gazed silently into the embers, and, for the very first time, the faint soul flames in his eye sockets went completely still. Look, whenever a skeleton turns dead, quiet, and solemn, you just know a heavy backstory is coming. My lord, this domain was once legendary, far beyond anything you could imagine. And with that, he laid out the story. And honestly, it was the absolute most epic, gut-wrenching, and infuriating tale I'd ever heard. And keep in mind, I once read a book where the dog dies in the end. The Third Lord, who ruled during the Golden Age, was an absolute beast of a leader. Under his reign, the skeleton crypt had expanded into a massive, unstoppable empire. He had opened up a permanent doorway directly into the shadow realm, amassed a terrifying legion of over 100,000 undead warriors, stacked it with skeleton mages, archers, warlocks, and dozens of top-tier skeleton generals. He even commanded 3 frostbone dragons, straight-up dragons made out of bare bones and ice magic, the kind of nightmare boss you'd only face at the end of a video game. On top of that, thousands of skeletal warhorses and griffins. This wasn't just some domain. This was a total superpower, an undead civilization, capable of crushing anything standing in its way. I just sat there, jaw practically hitting the floor, doing the quick math in my head. My army? 2 basic skeletal foot soldiers and a lone accountant. His army? 100,000 troops, complete with an air force. Sure, we were technically in the same realm, but the power gap was so ridiculously huge, it was funny. Well, almost. So, how did he end up losing? I asked because clearly things went downhill, considering I was literally chilling in the ruins of his former glory. Ashwin's voice turned deadpan. His expansion was too rapid. The ancient forces deep within the Shadow Realm took notice. For Ghost Kings, primordial, horrifying entities who had been lying low in the darkest abysses of the spirit world, decided that the skeleton crypt was getting way too arrogant. They formed a coalition and launched a massive joint ambush attack from all 4 directions simultaneously. East, west, north, and south. Everything hit at once. The eastern front collapsed first. The Frostbone Dragons, those legendary, cataclysmic superweapons, were completely wiped out in a single night. Not captured, not forced to retreat. Slaughtered all 3. Even their dragon souls couldn't make it back. Completely gone. I felt that heavy void right in my chest, even though I'd never laid eyes on a bone dragon before. Right after that, the western front caved in, and the enemy cut off access to the domain's mithril mines, the literal lifeblood for crafting weapons and armor. Without any fresh gear coming in, the skeletal soldiers' equipment began to completely fall apart. Swords lost their edges, shields splintered, and armor rusted away into dust. A grand legion of 100,000 slowly degraded into 100,000 defenseless piles of bone. This brutal war dragged on for 10 whole years, 10 years. And the Third Lord fought on the front lines himself, leading the charge and stubbornly refusing to back down an inch. 7 distinct times he rode out into the slaughter, and 7 times he returned completely battered. After the first campaign, he came back with every single plate of his armor cracked. By the second, his bones held more battle scars than actual bone. The third time around, he lost his entire left arm, had it slapped back on, and charged right back out the very next day. On the 5th campaign, half of his rib cage got blown to smithereens. He recovered for just 3 short days right here in this throne room, the exact spot where I was currently sitting, slurping instant ramen, before standing right back up and marching off to battle again. Then came the 7th campaign, and he never made it back. Ashwin recounted this softly, as if he'd repeated the tale many times before, maybe to himself, or maybe to the previous lords who sat here. Yet, the crushing weight of that loss never diminished. The dim firelight danced across his hollow skull, and those tiny blue wisps flickering in his eye sockets wavered for a brief second, a 1,000-year-old skeleton, still burdened by the unbearable grief of a war that he had survived, but his master hadn't. However, the Third Lord didn't go down without a fight. In his grand final stand, he single-handedly slayed 3 out of the 4 Ghost Kings. The first he sliced down head-on, right in the middle of combat. The second he dragged straight into a raging energy storm, wiping them both out in a kamikaze-style attack. And the third he obliterated by detonating his very own soul fire, the ghostly equivalent of setting off a nuclear self-destruct, vaporizing the Ghost King so completely that absolutely nothing was left behind. 3 kings dead, and the 4th fled in terror with whatever remained of his forces. A brutal 3-for-1 trade, the most Pyrrhic victory in the entire recorded history of the Skeleton Tomb. Because let's be real, a triumph that costs your ruler's life isn't truly a victory at all. With their lord gone, the skeletal forces lost their ultimate commander. Their battle formations completely shattered, and morale instantly dissolved. The surviving 4th Ghost King eventually regrouped, rallied every petty faction that held a grudge against the domain, and launched a massive counteroffensive. The skeletal troops, completely drained, stripped of gear, and utterly leaderless, fighting like isolated stragglers instead of a unified army, were systematically dismantled one by one. The survivors scattered everywhere. Some got captured, others were outright destroyed, and many fell into that eternal slumber that claims undead when their energy completely runs dry. And that is precisely how a massive empire of 100,000 strong, equipped with frost, dragons, and legendary griffins, dissolved into a penniless graveyard, manned by just 3 starving skeletons and a dried-up well. The 4th Lord inherited this absolute train wreck. No immediate death, but the entire Shadow Realm was watching like hawks. Every entity still remembered the sheer terror the skeleton tomb once was, and nobody wanted to see it claw its way back to power. He barely lasted a single year before meeting his end inside a dungeon. And the lords who came after him met varying degrees of, barely edging past total disaster. Yet not a single one managed to rebuild the domain. Every last guy ended up venturing into the Shadow Realm, full of grand dreams, only to never return. The previous guy even took a 200 energy loan from Ashuin, swearing he'd pay back double, and then completely vanished into thin air. A pretty clear trend was starting to emerge, and I was definitely not a fan, so I slowly blurted out. So basically, every single lord before me is dead. Ashuin tried his best to soothe my anxiety. As long as you refrain from being reckless, the threats are manageable, or if you prefer, once this debt is fully paid off, you could just place us into stasis, which would cut all maintenance costs to zero, leaving you to handle the dungeons completely solo. I appreciated the thought, but honestly, what would even be the point? I'd just be ruling over a completely deserted land, a leader without a single subject, left all alone in a giant graveyard. Until some random dungeon monster finally took me out. Yeah, hard pass. The skeletons were staying operational. The territory was staying active. I just needed to play it smarter than the former lords, who came before me. Which, considering their 100% mortality rate, shouldn't be that hard. Talk about a low bar. An insanely low bar, practically underground. Buried 6 feet deep, right next to those past lords. Still, Ushvin hit the nail on the head about one thing. No rusing. Slow and steady wins the race. Build up cautiously, keep a low profile. Don't mess with the Ghost Kings. Don't try to play a hero, just stay alive. I wriggled back into my sleeping bag and issued my final commands for the night. Keep that campfire burning, don't let it die out. Since the entrance was totally busted, and the freezing wind was blowing straight inside. And seriously, for the love of all things unholy, please do not accidentally burn my sleeping bag to a crisp. I really didn't want to end up recorded in Ashton's logs. As the very first lord to get taken out by a campfire mishap, I pulled my sleep mask over my eyes and settled in to spend my very first night as the ruler of a completely broke skeleton kingdom. Right behind me, I could hear the faint scratching of a pen on paper. Ushman was taking notes again. I didn't bother turning around. I was way too exhausted, but if I had actually looked, I would have caught the final line he wrote that evening. The closing remarks of his day one report on his brand new master. The Lord lacks any desire for world conquest, yet demonstrates an exceptionally strong will to survive. In my opinion, a lord who simply manages to stay breathing is a great lord. Followed by a super practical postscript. That door seriously needs some repairs. We'll scavenge some wooden planks tomorrow, somewhere outside the fortress walls. Out in the pitch darkness, Xiao Zhang tossed another log onto the flames. Xiao Wang stood watch right by the destroyed doorway, staring out into the total void. Mostly because there was literally nothing else to look at. And as for their new master, just a regular human tucked into a sleeping bag on a cold stone floor, surrounded by a trio of skeletons, and the lingering spirits of 100,000 fallen warriors, who would never ride into battle again. He slept peacefully for the very first time, ever since a pillar of light blasted right through his bedroom, ceiling, and turned his world upside down. I slept like an absolute log, which honestly made total sense considering my new living arrangement. That horror game sleeping bag was surprisingly top tier. Super warm, crazy comfortable, and zero complaint from me. But when I popped my eyes open, all 3 skeletons were sitting in the exact same spots they were in when I passed out. They hadn't nudged an inch. 8 straight hours of 3 bone bros, silently staring at me, snoring in the pitch dark. I decided to completely ignore how creepy that was, and just hit them with a cheerful good morning, as if this whole setup was totally normal. Ashwin already had fresh water ready before I even got up. Toothbrush laid out. Everything's set to go. Look, say what you want about the spooky skeleton aesthetic, but their room service is straight up 5 stars. I brushed my teeth, grabbed some bread and milk from the shop stash, and headed outside, munching on breakfast while surveying my new kingdom in broad daylight. First stop on the tour, the graveyard. Naturally, because that's where my future army is currently napping. Endless lines of dirt mounds, stretching all across the property, with every single one holding a skeleton warrior, just waiting for their wake-up call. My life savings and my war chest, all buried in the exact same spot. Pretty convenient, if you ask me. I kicked a small rock and asked Ashwin a question that had been bugging me. Is it just the grunt soldiers who can't speak? Or is everyone mute here? Just the basic foot soldiers. My lord, They were regular folks in their past lives, so after turning into skeletons, their soul power is way too weak to form words. That made total sense. Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang were low-level grunts. No voice box, no complex thoughts, just hyped-up bone clacking, and 100% blind loyalty. Honestly, they communicated surprisingly well. For two dudes who couldn't utter a single word, I could read like 60% of their jaw chatter, which is honestly better than some conversations I've had with real humans. If those two hit their maximum potential, how deadly would they actually be? Ashwin paused to think. Roughly white bone rank, which equals the fierce ghost here in the nether realm. And that opened up a whole breakdown of the spirit. World's power scaling, something I desperately needed, considering I've been blindly stumbling through this death game, without a clue who could instantly erase him. 7 ranks. Wandering Spirit, Fierce Ghost, Vengeful Wraith, Evil Ghost, Ghost General, Ghost King, and Ghost Emperor. Judging by my dungeon runs, that hanging ghost was likely hovering around Fierce Ghost level, while the pig-headed guard and that ball driver, Su Mao, sat somewhere between Fierce Ghost and Vengeful Wraith. As for me, the game slapped me with an E rank. The literal rock bottom, a walking participation trophy. But if Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang could actually reach Fierce Ghost level at peak power, which basically meant my starter infantry wasn't total trash. Top-tier cannon fodder, really. Think of them as the Honda Civics of undead troops. Nothing fancy, but super dependable, and surprisingly solid if you take care of them. Then something caught my eye. A burial mound way larger than the rest, sticking out like a giant boulder in a pile of pebbles. I pointed right at it and asked, "That's a skeleton general, isn't it?" Ashuin gave a nod, his tone dripping with deep respect. General Zhang Beichuan, silver bone rank, on par with a ghost general. Now we were talking. Having a ghost general in my army could easily carry me through any dungeon, leaving me free to just sit back and farming energy. I could already taste that sweet, lazy, micromanagement-free life. So how much to wake him up? Ashuin hesitated. And whenever NPC hesitates, it's never good news. At minimum, 3,000 energy points. I felt my soul literally leave my body. 3 grand. I had nearly lost my life fighting a giant pig demon and scrapping a ghost bus just to pocket a paltry 375. Summoning just 1 general meant grinding out 8 full max effort dungeon raids. And that was just his wake-up fee. On top of that, I have to feed him daily. In reality, fully stabilizing a single general would run me 5,000 to 6,000 points total. Yeah, forget I even asked. Then Ashuin, with way too much enthusiasm, broke down the full price list for every single unit type in the entire cemetery, acting like a sleazy car salesman pitching rides I clearly couldn't afford. Standard skeletons were 100 apiece. Cheap. Fair enough. Totally within budget. Moving up the ladder, archers and mages went for 150 to 200, a bit pricey but still doable. Squad leaders and captains were sitting at 300 to 500 each, with senior mages costing even more. The general scaled based on power. The absolute cheapest started at 3,000, while the most expensive was some kind of high-tier forbidden spellcasting archmage, whose price tag was a staggering 8,000 points. 8,000. I'd basically have to rob around 21 haunted buses just to pay for that guy. And don't even get me started on the bone dragons. 10,000 points minimum each. Produce. They needed a special facility called a dragon's nest, which undoubtedly cost a small fortune just to build. Even at the territory's peak, they had only ever managed to raise 3, which told me everything I needed to know about how insanely ridiculously overpriced these beasts were. Walking through that graveyard, I felt like a broke college grad. Window shopping at a high-end luxury dealership. Everything looked amazing. Everything was insanely overpowered. And every single bit of it was completely, 100% way out of my budget. My grand master plan for total skeleton army domination was going to take a bit longer than I thought. And by a bit, I mean like actual years. I started walking back toward the central plaza, feeling totally crushed when Ashuin suddenly chimed in. My lord, there's actually one specific skeleton unit I'd suggest raising. First, hearing that, I immediately turned around, as my curiosity sparked right back up. What kind? He gestured toward the far corner of the cemetery, where a cluster of tiny dirt mounds stood apart from the rest. These clearly weren't graves for soldiers. There were barely even bumps on the ground, looking as if someone had buried a bunch of shoeboxes. These are the non-combat skeletons, the utility types like blacksmiths, carpenters, and artisans, since they have 0 battle capabilities. Their summoning costs are dirt cheap, and their daily upkeep is virtually nothing. He paused for a second. I believe there's even a chef among them. A chef? A skeleton who could actually prepare my meals? No more struggling with clumsy portable stoves and instant ramen. No more trying to figure out how to boil water without accidentally setting my only shelter on fire. A full-time culinary pro who works for a mere 5 energy points a day, never requires a single hour of sleep, never complains about working conditions, and presumably can't even sample the food, meaning 0 arguments over the seasoning. Lead the way right now. Ashwin picked his way through the miniature mounds, inspecting each one until he located the exact burial spot. He had actually never met this cook before. None of the previous lords ever needed to eat. So the poor guy had been buried down here for who knows how long, completely forgotten, facing the ultimate form of unemployment. He wasn't fired, nor was he retired. He was literally 6 feet under simply because nobody needed lunch. The grave itself was ridiculously tiny, looking less like an actual burial site and more like a subtle hint that a body might be resting under the soil. I checked the revival fee. Just 20 energy points. 20. That was literally cheaper than piecing Xiao Zhang back together after he got flattened by a wild boar. And the daily upkeep? A mere 5 points for a personal chef. The sheer bargain of skeleton labor never ceased to amaze me. Do it. The dirt began to shift, and bones clattered beneath the surface. Suddenly, a bony hand burst straight out of the earth. Fingers splayed open like something straight out of a horror flick. Talk about a dramatic, super theatrical entry. I stood there, waiting for the rest of the skeleton to climb out, triumphantly from its centuries-long slumber. Except the hand completely stopped moving. Then, from beneath the ground, a raspy, fragile voice let out a weak wheeze. Oof, these old bones don't have an ounce of strength left. Can somebody give me a hand here? My very first professional recruit was literally trapped in his own grave and needed a rescue team just to get pulled out. Man, Skeleton Tom's glorious rise to power was certainly off to a grand, spectacular start. I motioned over Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang. Go drag him out. Then I turned to Ashwin with the most obvious question on my mind. How come this guy is able to talk? Ashwin explained that utility type skeletons actually kept their past intelligence and skills, since their entire purpose relied on using specialized expertise. I mean, a chef who forgot how to cook would just be a random pile of bones. Vetting of hot. Fair enough, that made sense. Combat skeletons were only built to hit stuff, so they got downgraded into jaw-clacking brainlets. Turns out utility skeletons actually kept their intellect and voice boxes. Different job requirements. Different resurrection packages. After about 2 minutes of digging, my skeleton army yanked the chef right out of his grave, like pulling up a stubborn carrot from the most depressing garden on earth. He hit the dirt floor, dusted off his calcium, and immediately fell to his knees before me. Thank you so much, my lord. I just stared at him. This skeleton actually had a mustache, 2 tiny little black whiskers, sitting right where facial hair used to be, when he was still breathing. His frame was noticeably wider than the soldiers, so this guy was definitely a big dude back in the day. Honestly, he looked like the type of chef who tasted every single dish he made. The facial hair was a lifesaver, though, because without it, I'd stand 0 chance picking him out of skeleton. Line up, Xiao Zhang, Xiao Wang, and any random kitchen skeleton would all look identical, from 10 feet away. At least Chef Mustache was easy to spot in a crowd. Get up, get up. No need to kneel. So, you were a chef in your past life? He stood up, bowing with his hands clasped together, a super old-school sign of respect, and replied, Indeed, my lord. I was the chief culinary officer of the Imperial Kitchen Bureau during the Liang Dynasty. Liang Dynasty? Like the spring and autumn period Liang? No, my lord. The emperor I served under was Xiao Yan. My brain immediately dug through 15 years of mandatory history classes. The Southern Liang Dynasty, the one from the Northern and Southern Dynasties period. I stared at him with newfound respect. Bro, you've been buried down here for like 1,500 years. 15 whole centuries underground. None of the previous overlords needed to eat, so nobody ever bothered reviving the cook. He had literally been resting in a shallow dirt grave for a millennium and a half, while lords came and went right above his head, waging wars, building empires, and dying in dungeons, and not a single person ever thought, hey, maybe we should dig up the chef. Talk about the ultimate gap on a resume. Work experience, Imperial Chef, 502 to 549 AD, followed by a 1,500-year blank space. Reason for leaving previous job, died, turned into a skeleton, and immediately left in the ground by people who didn't eat. Then, reality hit me. This guy's culinary expertise was from the 6th century. Stir-frying wasn't even invented until the Song dynasty. Hundreds of years after he kicked the bucket. His entire recipe book predated almost all the cooking techniques that modern Chinese cuisine is actually based on. I just blew 20 energy points to hire a cook, whose idea of gourmet cooking was basically throw food over fire and pray for the best. Am I really going to have to teach this ancient chef how to cook? Will my own culinary skills peak at boiling water? Just toss in the seasoning packet and wait 3 minutes. Honestly, it would be a total case of the blind leading the clueless. So, I went ahead and made an executive call. I pulled up the horror game shop and bought an entire set of modern cookbooks. We're talking every single technique, recipe, and style of cooking imaginable. The book spawned in a stack so massive that Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang had to haul them together, literally wobbling under the sheer weight of 1,000 years of culinary evolution. Pointing at the giant pile, I looked right at Mustache Chef and said, "Read all of these and master modern cooking. You've got 48 hours. He stared at the mountain of books, then slowly looked back at me, completely speechless. He opened his mouth to complain, probably along the lines of, "Do I seriously have to read every single one?" But I was already walking away. 20 energy spent, decision finalized. Absolutely zero refunds. For the next 2 days, I'd have to survive on instant ramen, while my new recruit speed ran 15 centuries of culinary advancement. Hopefully, by the time the next dungeon cycle rolled around, I'd actually come home to a real meal instead of cup noodles. Now that the chef situation was sorted out, I headed over to the dungeon portal to check the countdown timer. 2 whole days until the next raid. Nothing to do there, but just as I turned around, my eyes caught the massive mountain sitting right behind our territory. It was a desolate hill, with just a few withered trees clinging to its side, like they were hanging on for dear life. "Ashwin," I asked, "what used to be up there?" "That was the original main hall, my lord. It got destroyed back in the war, so we rebuilt it at our current location." Turns out, that was the former throne room of the Third Lord, that legendary giant skeleton, who once commanded 100,000 troops and slayed 3 ghost kings. Naturally, I just had to check it out. I mean, what else was I going to do? My schedule was completely empty, and my entire to-do list literally consisted of waiting around and trying not to starve. But man, that climb almost took me out. The mountain looked deceptively short from the bottom, a classic optical illusion that has been ruining hikers' dreams ever since humans started walking. There were loose rocks everywhere, no clear path, and 0 handrails, just pure, brutal scrambling up a slope that seemed to get steeper with every step. I originally estimated a quick 30-minute hike, but an hour later, I was wheezing uncontrollably at just the halfway mark. Bent completely over with my hands on my knees, I was reevaluating every single life choice that had led me to voluntarily hike a mountain in a realm full of skeletons. Meanwhile, Ashwin was standing right beside me, looking completely unfazed. I mean, why wouldn't he be? No lungs, no muscles, and 0 sweat glands. He tucked his notebook under his arm and steadied me with one of his bony hands. "Once you upgrade the main hall, you'll be able to spend energy to physically enhance your body, right?" Great. Yet another feature locked behind a paywall I couldn't afford. 500 energy just for the hall upgrade, tossed right onto the massive pile of things I desperately needed, but couldn't possibly buy. Right in between the skeleton general and the bone dragon, I dragged my breathless body up to the summit, pretty much relying on Ashwin to haul me through that final brutal stretch. At the peak was a wide, barren plateau, empty save for a colossal stone throne that was half-shattered and covered in ancient engravings. This thing was mind-bogglingly huge. I couldn't even reach halfway up the seat itself. Turns out the Third Lord was an absolute unit of a skeleton, standing easily over 11 feet tall, and his throne was custom-made to fit that scale. Literally everything else from the old palace had been wiped out, completely leveled, leaving only this single seat behind, likely because soaking in decades of dark energy had reinforced it far beyond the reach of any physical weapon. A silent monument to a ruler who poured in everything, only to fall in the end. I stepped around the throne toward the mountain's edge, and when I looked down, my jaw practically hit the floor. The domain stretched out way further than what I'd checked out. Behind the dungeon portal, vast expanses of land fanned into the distance, littered with ancient ruins I'd never laid eyes on, crumbled walls and shattered foundations. The tragic remains of a civilization that once filled every single corner of this place. With bustling life, Ushvin materialized beside me and explained. The domain expands as the main hall ranks up. Those sectors are currently locked off, but they'll start unlocking once you reach level 5. Level 5? Bro, I was sitting at level 1 and couldn't even afford level 2. The land visible from up here was easily 10 times bigger than what I currently owned. An entire empire locked behind massive paywalls, just waiting for a lord, stacked enough to turn the key. Every piece of rubble down there represented a facility waiting to be restored, and every empty plot was prime real estate for housing troops, crafting workshops, or training grounds. I gazed out over all that untapped potential, all that vast land, those ancient ruins, and all that deep lore, and uttered the only logical thing a dead-broke lord, standing on a mountain of crushed dreams, could say. Well, one step at a time, I guess. By the time I headed back to the throne room, our mustache-wearing chef was already practicing his wok technique, flipping sand around in a skillet like a skeletal. Gordon Ramsay warming up for dinner service. The second he caught sight of me, he dropped his gear and rushed straight over, clasping his bony hands together, and straight up begging, "My lord, could you please grant me some real ingredients to cook with?" See, cooking wasn't just a job for this guy. It was his absolute life's calling. 15 years buried underground, and the very first thing he wanted to do was hop right back into the kitchen. Honestly, I had to respect that level of grind, even if it was coming from a mustache-toting skeleton who had been pushing up daisies since the fall of the Liang dynasty. With a flick of my wrist, I summoned a massive pile of fresh ingredients and seasonings, right out of the shop inventory and onto the stone table. Just a single point. For enough food to supply a whole restaurant for a month. Man, this ghost economy's pricing system was still beyond broken. Go crazy and absorb everything fast. He snatched up the spice containers, just like a child waking up on Christmas Day, and dashed right back to his cooking station. I actually had high hopes since he was a royal chef, packed with centuries of culinary experience, along with modern cookbooks and endless ingredients. What could possibly go wrong? Absolutely everything. Literally everything went downhill during 2 days of taste testing. His experimental dishes practically obliterated my taste buds. The guy had never laid eyes on soy sauce in his life. He had never even come across chili flakes, oyster sauce, or MSG either. His way of handling modern seasonings fell right between a chaotic chemistry experiment and throwing darts with his eyes closed. One dish was so ridiculously salty, I felt like he was curing my body for the winter. Another dish was so tasteless, it literally tasted like a lukewarm apology. And he kept tossing in strange, ancient ingredients that haven't been seen in a kitchen for over 1,000 years. Weird stuff that I couldn't recognize and honestly didn't care to. My tongue was completely dead by the second day and never recovered. So the moment the dungeon countdown reached 0, and I called a final meeting at the portal gate, I had a few choice words aimed straight at our chef. I stared right into his empty eye sockets and stated, or, "I'm burying your bones back in the dirt." Or, "I'm burying your bones right back in the dirt." He wiped fake sweat off his non-existent forehead in panic. "Most certainly, my lord, without a shadow of a doubt." I ordered Ashuin to personally monitor the chef's culinary practice, since apparently my job description as a tactical commander now included food inspection for an undead cooking class. And then I stepped straight into the portal. I was totally expecting pitch blackness, dense fog, and an eerie vibe. You know, the standard spooky starter pack from the Netherrealm. But instead I was hit with bright sunlight and a cozy, orange-tinted sunset, glowing right over the skyline of a completely ordinary suburban housing neighborhood with apartment complexes, paved streets, and neatly manicured bushes. A sign mounted near the main entrance read Howding District Westgate. Where on earth is the Netherrealm? Why is the sun shining? This entire dungeon was located right in the mortal realm, the ordinary human world in broad daylight, which brought me to one soul-crushing realization. There was no energy around here. Energy was tied to cursed relics. Back in the underworld, while this quiet suburban area probably contained about as much negative energy as a neighborhood spa. Literally half. My whole motivation for clearing dungeons had just vanished into thin air. I let out a heavy sigh that could make a ghost jealous, and pulled up my objective interface. Dungeon title, Community. Night Patrol, category. Endurance, threat level. S rank, an entire tier higher. And the Phantom Bus Quest, core objective. Work as the night watchman at the western entrance. For 2 back-to-back nights. Do not permit any non-human being to cross inside. The residential zone, completion payout. 20 points, double the base reward from the last trial, which was definitely a nice upgrade. Side quest 1. Accurately spot and grant entry to real human residents. You get 5 points for every person you let in safely. However, accidentally letting a non-human slide through? That's a brutal penalty of minus 20 points, which means you need 4 perfect calls just to rack up 20 points. And a single screw-up completely wipes away all that hard work. And it gets worse with side quest number 2. Residents might reach out asking for help with various issues. If I decided to take on the request, failing was not an option. Failing meant receiving official complaints, which in dungeon terminology clearly meant a fate. A whole lot worse than a nasty 1-star Yelp review. The system tips were downright creepy. You have a guard booth, a security monitor, a resident registry, and a flashlight. And above all else, never trust your own eyes. Certain things look entirely human, but they're definitely not. I took a moment to digest all this, staring directly at the guard shack ahead. A guard booth of all places. So the system was forcing me to work as a security guard. The exact same gig as Wang Wuqing, that massive 400-pound pig monster, whose head I crushed with an 80-year grudge pipe wrench, just about 3 days ago. Talk about cosmic irony. The universe seriously had the sickest sense of humor imaginable, from a bus seat stealer to a pig banker, and now taking over the precise job of the guy I literally beat to death. What a full circle moment. Right then, an old man wearing a security guard uniform stepped out from the booth and gestured for me to come over. Hey Xiao Su, what are you just standing around there for? Time for the shift change. The dungeon had actually given me a cover identity. I was officially Xiao Su, the guy coming in for the night shift. I quickly jogged over before whatever penalty the system had for clocking in late could kick in. The elderly guard began handing things over to me with the effortless routine of someone who'd done this exact handover 10,000 times before. Uniforms in the closet, gate controller is in the drawer. Flashlight and rubber nightstick are inside the cabinet, and dinner's in the microwave. He gave my face a quick once-over, deeming me young enough to actually survive through the night, before dropping one last ominous piece of advice. Mess around on your phone all you want, but whatever you do, do not fall asleep. That's when they come for you. With that, he grabbed his trusty thermos and shuffled off into the neighborhood, leaving me all alone at the west gate, as the sun slowly sank lower and lower past the horizon. 6 p.m., exactly 12 hours remaining until the next shift change. 2 entire nights of this nightmare. I threw on the security uniform, which surprisingly fit pretty well for standard horror game gear, and took a seat behind the front desk. I picked up the rubber baton, inspecting it carefully in my hands, waiting for system stat pop-up to show up, and zip. No stat boost, no special properties. 0 dark energy infused into it. Just a completely ordinary piece of rubber-coated wood. I tossed it right back onto the desk. Total useless junk. Glancing over at the monitor, it cycled through live security camera angles around the complex. Nothing out of the ordinary so far. The entrance was dead silent. The streets were totally deserted, and it almost felt serene, which in horror game logic usually meant some absolute nightmare was about to drop on me. I decided to reread the mission rules once more, very carefully, hunting for any potential exploits, and I spotted a loophole so brilliant. I almost gave myself a standing ovation right then and there. The side objective rewarded me specifically for granting entry to humans. It slammed me with penalties whenever I let non-humans slip inside. The core rule? My primary directive was simply to block all non-humans from entering. But here was the real catch. Nowhere in the entire rulebook did it actually state that I was forced to grant access to anyone. Not actual humans, not vengeful spirits. Absolutely nobody. The mission strictly stated keep non-humans out. It never commanded me to let every single human through. Those were 2 entirely separate conditions, and only one of them was mandatory for survival. So, what if I just kept the gate locked for eternity and refused everyone? If nobody gets in, then no monsters can slip through either. Boom, main objective automatically cleared. Sure, I'd sacrifice the extra side quest points, but honestly, who cares? I'd much rather forfeit a few bonus points than accidentally welcome a bloodthirsty monster wearing a human skin suit and take a brutal 20-point penalty for each slip-up. However, the true stroke of genius was phase 2 of my mastermind plan. I could actually sense an energy clinging to objects if someone walked up to the gate, carrying gear radiating heavy energy. There was no way they were human. Normal humans don't casually wander around carrying ghost-tainted, cursed items. So instead of agonizing over who was a real person and who was a monster in disguise, based on ambiguous visual clues, I'd simply scan their belongings for een energy. Airi, glow mint non-human, while no glow mint probably human, though they still weren't getting inside anyway, because I was keeping this gate strictly shut for everyone. As for the non-humans, I'd fabricate excuses to get close, inspect their possessions, and maybe confiscate a few infused items under the guise of routine security procedures before sending them packing. Rob the ghosts, protect the neighborhood, harvest valuable energy, and complete the trial, all from the comfort of a heated guard booth, equipped with a microwave meal and my phone. I kicked back in my chair, staring at the ceiling with a smirking grin. Man, I really am a genius. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, and shadows lengthened across the area, dark entities somewhere nearby were slowly beginning to awaken. Meanwhile, over at the West Gate, the most unbothered guard in horror game history sat comfortably behind his desk, armed with a flashlight, a completely useless rubber nightstick, and a strategy so brilliantly lazy that it was bound to actually work. As it turned out, I wasn't the only security guard assigned to this shift. The dungeon system had dispatched 4 players across 4 gates, north, south, east, and west, with me stuck on the west entrance. Somewhere out there, 3 other poor souls were sitting in identical booths, suffering through the exact same mental breakdown over how to handle spectral residents, trying to gain entry into the apartment complex. What I didn't realize at the time was that the guy stationed at the east gate, a player named Xiao Yunqi, had devised a strategy completely opposite to mine. His reasoning went something like this: admit 5 humans, pocket 25 points, and if he accidentally lets one ghost slip in and loses 20, he'd still net a 5-point profit, as long as human visitors outnumber the ghosts, which seemed like a safe mathematical bet. He was guaranteed to profit no matter what happened. So his whole game plan was to just fling the gates wide open, letting absolute everyone in: humans, spirits, demons, delivery guys, random strays, you name it. A pure volume play, totally choosing quantity over quality. The guy was running a nightclub bouncer policy for a haunted apartment building. Meanwhile, I was operating on strict maximum security lockdown rules. Nobody steps foot inside, I don't care if you're the Pope, holding a certified birth certificate and 3 different forms of government ID. This entrance is locked down. Go find another way in or crash on the curb. My logic was completely foolproof too. If nobody gets in, then no non-humans can slip through. The basic objective is instantly cleared. 0 danger, 0 work, 0 headache. I was fine giving up the extra points from letting humans in, to pour all my focus into what I actually cared about: scanning non-human guests for infused gear that I could snatch up for myself. I summoned Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang right away, and shoved them under the bed inside the security station. This was a totally normal residential area, and the absolute last thing I needed was 2 skeletal guards, standing post at the entrance, scaring the locals into giving themselves heart attacks. They were to stay hidden until things went sideways. My backup plan, my secret skeletal forces, stashed right under a bed frame, just like the monsters hiding under a kid's bed. Except these ones are working on my payroll. 7 p.m., pitch black outside. The initial batch of residents started showing up, folks heading back from their daily grind, lugging briefcases and bags of groceries, looking worn out and totally average. They tapped their key cards at the gate system. The turnstile gave a quick chime, and they walked on through without giving me a single glance. I stood near the post keeping eyes on every single person. Not a trace of energy on any of them. Just ordinary humans making their way back to ordinary apartments. That keycard reader was essentially a built-in human verification filter, so if you had a card, you were clearly legit. My actual job was only for the people who showed up without cards. I was just about to head back inside to monitor the screens when I caught it. "Hey there, handsome." That voice arrived way before she actually did. Super sweet, overly sugary, dripping with totally fake charm. I turned around and spotted a woman strutting my way, straight out of the shadows, and man, was she putting on a walk. A full-on fashion runway walk in a black-strap dress that was so ridiculously short it barely qualified as clothing. Deep low-cut neck, bright red lipstick, and her hair swishing with every single click of her heels against the concrete. She looked like she belonged in a high-fashion magazine. Instead of wandering into this neighborhood, my eyes ran a fast scan, and the very first thing I checked was her shadow. She actually had one, which was a great sign. A classic trick for spotting ghosts. Then I glanced at her accessories, her necklace, bracelet, and tiny purse. I waited for the energy notifications to pop up, but nothing. Every single thing on her was totally clean. Just an ordinary purse, and plain jewelry, showing absolutely zero supernatural aura. Honestly, pretty disappointing if you're looking for loot. But hey, at least it meant she probably wasn't packing anything worth stealing. Not that it mattered to me anyway. Monster or human, she wasn't getting past my gate. Hey handsome, I forgot my keycard. Could you be a dear and open the gate for me? She leaned in half a step closer, unleashing a cloud of perfume so thick. It basically had its own zip code. Her eyes locked onto mine, giving me a look that screamed, I'm totally acting cute on purpose. And it always works. So I stepped right back. Sorry lady, gate's broken. She just blinked. That whole flirty act flickered out like a TV losing signal. Wait, broken? You can't open it. Nope. Try another entrance or call a buddy to bring your card. The shift in her attitude was instant. The sweet, breathy voice vanished into thin air, and those seductive eyes went completely cold. She stood up straight, crossed her arms tightly, and her whole vibe did a total 180, flipping from sweet damsel in distress straight to full-on Karen demanding to see the manager. Are you serious right now? It's literally just pressing a button? Is opening the gate really that big of a deal? Technically speaking, she had a point. Under normal conditions, a guard should definitely let a resident through once they verify their identity. I mean, that was literally what I got paid to do. Heck, the veteran guard had even walked me through the routine. If they forget their card, just get them to sign the logbook. Buzz them in and boom, done. Hell, previous guards probably didn't even bother making people sign in. They just waved pretty much anyone through. And to be totally fair, she only pulled out the charm offensive because she thought I was hot. Not because she was some undercover supernatural predator. Well, probably. Either way, I wasn't about to stick around to find out. Gate's dead, lady. My hands are tied. Her face cycled through about 3 different shades of rage before settling on a deep, furious crimson. And then she did something I totally didn't see coming. She spun around toward the crowd of residents scanning their cards, spotted a familiar face, and instantly shifted tactics from arguing with security to calling him back up. Von Ki, over here, a massive guy, broke away from the crowd and started strutting over. Easily 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, wearing a dark jacket. He had the kind of build that made you think he either worked hard labor on a construction site or basically lived at the gym. He glanced at me, then back at the woman, whose name was apparently Shirley, taking in the whole scene. What's going on? This guard won't let me in. She pointed a finger at me with the absolute righteous fury of someone who had just been locked out of her own apartment complex by some random 20-year-old kid holding a cheap rubber nightstick. Wang Ji tried to play diplomat, pulling out a pack of cigarettes and offering me one. The universal guy tactic for smoothing things over. Hey brother, care for smoke? I'm good, thanks. His hand just hovered in the air awkwardly for a second before he slowly pulled it back. Clearing his throat, he decided to try smooth-talking his way through. Look, she lives right over in Building 12. Unit 2, Apartment 506. You can double-check the system. She's been a local resident here for years. She just happened to forget her key card today. Give her a break, man. Meanwhile, I just gave him an unblinking stare. That unmoving gaze clearly made him feel uneasy. No joke, man. She actually lives here. I can totally vouch for her. I let him finish running his mouth, and then hit him back with a response colder than an icy winter breeze. Gate's out of order. Nothing I can do. The confident smirk wiped right off his face like a candle getting snuffed out. He stared at the gate, which was painfully obvious to anyone was working fine, considering dozens of people had literally just scanned their way through, without a single problem. He glanced down at the fully functional turnstile, and then stared right back at me. You could practically hear the gears grinding in his brain, slowly realizing that the gate being broken wasn't some technical glitch at all. It was my personal choice to keep it closed. He stood there frozen in complete silence for a few seconds, trying to figure out how to even argue with the guy, who clearly didn't give a damn about reality. Right behind him, Shally stood with her arms crossed tight, impatiently tapping her foot on the floor. And there I was, chilling with the ultimate calmness of a guy who literally had 2 creepy skeletons stashed under his bed, a massive wrench tucked in his bag, and zero intention of letting a single person through that gate. Not a chance in hell. If this twisted horror game wanted me to play security guard, fine. I was going to be either the worst guard ever or the absolute best, depending on how you looked at it. Easily the most relentless security officer this place had ever seen. No one gets past me, period. The gate is broken. The entrance is locked. And I cannot care less how many people try to vouch for you. Welcome to the West Gate, folks. It's permanently shut down. Unsurprisingly, Wang Ji didn't take being rejected very well. Getting shut down cold by a 20-year-old security guard, right in front of a cute neighbor, was basically his ultimate nightmare scenario coming true. So he barged straight into my guard booth, slammed his palm down hard on the desk, like he was starring in some cheesy action movie, and tried to act like a total tough guy. Open this gate right now. Don't make me get violent with you. Those skinny little arms of yours look like they'd snap in half. Honestly, goo. Really cute. Man was seriously attempting to threaten a guy who literally bashed in the skull of a 400-pound pig demon just 3 days ago, using a 10-pound heavy-duty wrench. Of course, he had no clue. To him, I was just some scrawny, helpless kid working security who needed a harsh lesson in good customer service. So, I picked up the electrobaton, my little trophy from that pig demon battle, the one loaded with that sweet paralyzing effect, and casually flipped the switch. Crackling blue sparks surged violently between the prongs, lighting up the dark booth with a flashing glow, and a buzzing noise that sounded like a swarm of furious wasps having a fit. I didn't even bother standing up or raising my voice. I just sat back, comfortably, taser sparking right in my hand, and threw him a cold smile. Want to test your luck? The massive gulp he swallowed was so loud you could hear across the room. I literally got a front row seat to his entire thought process, written all over his face in real time. Step 1. Realization. This guard literally brought his own taser to the shift. Step 2. Figure out that this guy is crazy enough to actually use it on you. Step 3. Weigh the total embarrassment of having to explain to your coworkers how a security guard zapped you, just because you were playing the hero for your hot neighbor. Step 4. Execute a tactical retreat. He puffed out his chest one last time, just to save face. You've got some nerve, kid. I'm reporting you to your manager. Then he turned around and power walked out of the booth, moving so fast he was practically jogging by the time he hit the pavement. Shelley was standing there with hopeful eyes, while Wang Ji's face turned completely red as a tomato. Yeah, he admitted he was wrong, but that gate really is busted. Maybe try entering through another side. He didn't even stick around for her reply, just mumbled, I've got to be somewhere, and practically threw himself through the card turnstile. Shelley wasn't dumb, though. She watched her supposed savior run from the fight, without even looking back once, and she instantly figured out what went down. She stomped her foot in frustration, cursed me out under her breath, calling me a dead guard, and stormed off into the dark night. Finally, some peace. But what I was starting to realize was that this horror game built this level to squeeze players from every single direction. Denying entry didn't just mean rejecting ghosts. It meant dealing with super aggressive humans who had totally valid reasons to come inside, and zero patience for a security guard who decided that actually opening the gate was somehow beneath him. The system wanted to force conflict. It wanted players to feel overwhelmed and just let people in, which massively increased the odds of accidentally welcoming a monster wearing a human skin suit. My nobody gets past me tactic was foolproof on paper, but the sheer social nightmare of maintaining it was utterly exhausting. Meanwhile, on the other side of the complex, the other 3 guards were going through their own wild sagas. Over at the east gate, Jiayuan went full lazy mode, leaving both gates wide open with his feet kicked up on the desk, not even trying to check a single person. His plan was pure math. Since there were more humans than ghosts, he'd stay in the green, no matter what snuck past him. This guy was straight up playing poker with monster detection, gambling everything on pure odds. Now, the players at the north and south gates were doing things by the book, verifying IDs, asking questions, and double-checking with the neighbors. Super careful, super methodical, and absolutely terrified of messing up. Honestly, it was the smartest way to play, but also easily the most nerve-wracking. The initial rush hour finally wrapped up around 7:15, right as the last resident tapped their keycard and walked in. After that, the whole street went dead silent. Eerie quiet. No footsteps. No cars passing by. No voices at all. Nothing but pure darkness creepily closing in on the faint fluorescent light of my guard booth. That was when the real trial officially kicked off. Back during rush hour, there were plenty of people passing through, making it easy to double-check everyone's ID. Now, whoever showed up was going to be completely on their own. 0 witnesses, and nobody else around to verify who they actually were. It was just me, my handy stun baton, and whatever crazy creature showed up next. Right on cue, my stomach let out a huge growl, loud enough to echo off the walls of the booth. Oh yeah, the senior guard had brought up dinner earlier. Sure enough, I spotted it inside the microwave. A packed bento box with 2 sides of veggies and 1 meat dish. Honestly, not terrible for dungeon shift food. It was completely ice cold, though, so I threw it back in a microwave and started heating it up. As the machine started humming, I stood there with my back turned to the door, just staring at the glass as the tray slowly rotated inside. My mind focused on nothing more important than whether that meat was supposed to be pork or chicken. But then, right beneath the bed, Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang suddenly began to stir. I caught the faint clattering sound of bones scraping against the floorboards. Not their usual casual, fidgety movements, but something totally intentional and urgent. Glancing down toward the ground, I saw both skeletons extending their bony hands, pointing straight ahead in absolute sync, at a spot right behind my back. I didn't even waste a second trying to turn and check first. Zero hesitation, zero questions asked. I snatched the electric baton off the counter, flipped the power switch, and whipped around with a heavy swing. A hunched-over old man was standing right there, literally inside my booth, barely 2 feet away from me. He had snuck inside without making a single sound. No footfalls, no sound of breathing, not even the creak of a door, nothing at all. As dead silent as death itself, which made sense, considering he probably was the Grim Reaper, or at least Death's super creepy uncle. His eyes were locked onto the front desk, right where the gate remote was sitting, and his wrinkled hand was already reaching out to grab it. The guy was trying to swipe the controller and open up the gate, all by himself while my back was turned. The shock baton slammed hard into his torso, and 50 points of raw supernatural electricity handled the rest of the job. Blue sparks instantly exploded all over his body as he took the hit. He let out a high-pitched, piercing shriek that definitely didn't sound like anything an actual old man could make, before collapsing onto the floor like a puppet, with its strings cut, spasming and violently twitching. His limbs were jerking around in unnatural angles that looked completely wrong for human anatomy. I stood towering over him, baton still humming with power, my heart pounding in my chest, while the microwave behind me kept happily spinning away. He lay balled up on the ground, tightly clutching the gate controller that he'd managed to swipe right as he went down. Rule number 1 of supernatural security work: never, ever turn your back to the entrance. Rule number 2: skeleton coworkers make for the absolute best motion sensors. And rule number 3: a trusty stun baton fixes pretty much everything. The microwave chimed to signal my dinner was ready. So there I was, with an electrocuted intruder lying on my floor, a stolen remote controller I needed to grab back, and a brutal 12-hour night shift still stretching out ahead of me. Into the pitch-black night. Stepping right over the old guy, I went straight for my food. Hey, priorities, right? Crouching down, I pried the main gate. Remote, right out of his twitching fingers, tucking it securely into my pocket. Can't have anyone opening the gate without my permission, after all. Just as I was preparing to stand back up, though, a system tooltip popped up right over his shirt. Unwashed face mask, 50 energy, caked in drool after years of being worn constantly. A whole 50 points for what I thought was a shirt. Turns out it wasn't a shirt at all, but a face mask disguised as a top layer. Honestly, that description was beyond disgusting. But 50 energy was 50 energy. My hand was already reaching for it, when my brain finally caught up to what I was doing, making me freeze mid-grab. I was literally about to strip an unconscious, elderly man lying on the floor of a guard booth, even with his super flexible moral standards I'd picked up since landing in this horror game. This felt like crossing a line, a blurry line, sure, and one I was totally fine crossing, just not with my own hands. That's what minions are for. Glancing under the bed, 2 sets of blue, ghostly glowing eyes stared right back out from the dark, looking like the creepiest night lights ever. Nice work earlier. You too. Now crawl out here and strip his clothes off. Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang scrambled out from beneath the bed, with the sheer excitement of skeletons, who had been waiting their entire lives for a job like this. They took their positions on opposite sides of the old man and began yanking at his clothes, like a couple of dogs tearing apart a squeaky toy. They had zero sense of basic decency, which honestly made them perfect for the job. They were right in the middle of stripping him when his fingers twitched. Suddenly, a voice echoed out, young, sharp and furious, completely unfitting for the frail body, collapsed on the floor. Get your hands off me, staring down at his face. His lips hadn't moved at all. The voice wasn't coming from his mouth. It was coming from deep inside him, or more accurately, from his back. Frowning, I ordered, tear it off. Don't worry about keeping it intact. My skeleton duo grabbed both sides of the shirt mask thing and yanked with all their force in opposite directions. The material shredded apart with a wildly satisfying rip, and what was revealed underneath made me leap backward, so fast I almost tripped over the desk chair, attached directly to the old man's frail back, literally fused right into it, with its hands and feet melted into his flesh, like some horrifying biological backpack, was a dwarf. a tiny, furious, and very much conscious humanoid creature. Its limbs completely grafted onto the old man's spine. Only its head could move around, and right at that moment, it whipped its head around toward me with eyes dripping with pure murder. "You're dead." It shrieked, its cheeks puffing up like a bullfrog, getting ready to croak. I've watched enough anime to recognize a charge attack when I see one, and this little freak was about to blow. It was winding up some kind of sonic blast, and judging by the intense supernatural energy surging across its face, taking the head-on would have scrambled my brain, like eggs in a blender. Luckily for me, but unfortunately for the dwarf, its charge-up animation was ridiculously long, longer than anything I'd ever seen. Its cheeks puffed up for 2 full seconds, before it could even fire a thing. In real-time combat, that was practically standing frozen, holding a giant sign that said, "Please punch me." So I shoved my stun baton straight into its face. Mid-inhale, crack. Blue sparks flew, the dwarf's eyes rolled right back, and it went totally limp against the old man's back, knocked out cold once more. Total time taken from spotting the threat to totally neutralizing it, roughly 4 seconds. Honestly, this stun baton was fast becoming my absolute favorite gear. Forget the trusty revenge wrench. This baby was compact, fully rechargeable, and insanely effective at taking down creepily-parasitic, supernatural dwarfs. Seriously, every household needs one. That charge-up took so long I could have made a whole sandwich. I muttered, shaking off the remaining sparks from the baton. Now that the creature was confirmed to be anything but human, since normal humans don't usually have miniature people permanently fused to their spinal cords, I felt zero remorses about looting the rest of his gear. I ordered my skeleton duo to flip this bizarre 2-in-1 freak show over and strip search it completely. The only other valuable thing on him was a jade archer's ring on the old guy's thumb, worth 15 energy points. Not a huge jackpot, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. Between this ring and the ghost mask, I just pocketed 65 points from a single encounter. This guard booth setup was already paying off big time. Right then, an idea hit me, like a bolt of pure, divine genius. I glanced over at the passed-out dwarf-man hybrid on the floor, then turned to look at Little Zhang and Little Wang, who were standing over the body, looking like proud alley cats that had just cornered a ugly mouse. "Hey, can you guys absorb energy straight out of this monster's body?" They both aggressively nodded so hard. I honestly thought their skulls were going to pop off. Turns out, they had already started siphoning it. This dwarf was barely a low-rank fierce ghost, actually weaker than either of my minions at full strength. Now, if it were awake, a ghost could easily fight back against being drained. But knocked out like this? It was basically an all-you-can-eat buffet with no security guards. I pointed toward the side and said, "Drag it over to the corner and feast." Though a practical question quickly crossed my mind. "If this thing wakes back up, can you two handle it?" They shook their heads, then nodded, and then shook them all over again. The classic skeleton sign language, for it's complicated. This exact moment was why I desperately needed a translator. I snapped my fingers and cast Summon Skeleton, Su-In. Instantly, my military strategist materialized right in the middle of the guard booth. His trusty notepad already pulled out, 100% ready for duty before his bony feet even hit the floor. My main territory could manage fine without him for a bit. Mustache Chef was holding down the fort, and unless that creepy old wall started doing something even freakier than sighing, absolutely nothing was about to go down. Break it down for me. What are they actually trying to explain? About keeping that thing under control, as one conferred with the 2 skeleton guards, speaking in their bone-rattling tongue for about 2 minutes, before turning back to give me the rundown. They said that, as long as the creature is sitting on a ton of energy, they can't handle it, but once they drain enough of its juice, they'll be able to keep it completely pacified. That made total sense. Drain the battery first, and the machine loses its ability to fight back. But Aswan wasn't done talking just yet. "My lord, there's actually a far better alternative here." The flames in his eyes flickered, with something I was starting to recognize as sheer excitement. "You could just ship this creature straight back to our domain. At its current power level, I can suppress it with 0 effort. And here comes the best part of the deal. Once we siphon its energy down to 0, it will gradually recharge itself over time. Sure, the whole process takes several months, but that means we can harvest it over and over again. Forever." He paused for a second to let that sink in. Mind you, this trick only works on weak entities. If you try sending back something absurdly strong, that can easily overpower our forces. It could literally seize full control of the entire territory. I stared directly at him, then down at the knocked-out dwarf, and then right back at him, Are you telling me, I said slowly, that I can literally abduct ghosts, drag them back to my base, and exploit them as infinite renewable power sources? Aswan tilted his skull slightly to the side. That is a surprisingly accurate way to put it, yes. A living power cell, a literal ghost battery. Snatch up low-tier supernatural entities. Drag them straight back to the domain. Suck out their energy, wait for them to recharge. Bleed them dry again, and repeat the loop forever. Pure passive income. Infinite green ghost energy. My domain's financial crisis wasn't just manageable anymore. It was literally about to become a thing of the past. That is, assuming I could secure a steady supply of kidnapped spirits. The skeleton mortgage, the daily operational costs. The base upgrades, the army resurrection fees. Every single expense could be completely covered by a basement, packed with captured ghosts, slowly leaking out energy. Just like supernatural power banks. Hooked up to the most questionable charging grid in history. I looked down at the dwarven creature on the floor. With a whole new perspective, this wasn't an enemy. This wasn't a threat at all. This was my very first piece of infrastructure. Employee número 5, en paz, unconscious, and about to spend the next few months zip-tied to a wall in a skeletal graveyard, powering up my entire empire. One slow drip of ghost juice at a time. I grinned, the sinister smile of a man who had just revolutionized the ghost power grid. Send it back. Tell the chef to keep a close eye on it. Just tell me how to set it up. I said already. Mentally. Categorizing the dwarf creature under fixed assets. In my brain's corporate ledger. Aswan's fair warning about not capturing anything. It was way too dangerous, so I immediately took mental note and filed it under. Yeah, absolutely not. There was no way I was going to abduct a ghost king and drag it back to my tiny, fragile domain. My base could barely manage a basic culinary lesson. So the last thing I needed was an enraged, high-level entity breaking loose and kicking everybody out. Look, my appetite for risk definitely had strict limits, and those limits were strictly capped at threats my skeletons could actually pin down without getting blasted. Luckily, the extraction process was beautifully simple. When I used the recall ability to send Atsuin back to base, he just had to be holding onto the creature, as long as the target couldn't fight back, meaning it was knocked cold, completely drained, or incapacitated. It would automatically get dragged right along with him. Think of it like checked baggage on a flight, except the luggage was a parasitic phantom dwarf, and the flight was an instant teleportation beam, straight to a catacomb full of skeletons. So, how much energy can we actually squeeze out of this guy? I inquired, because at this point, my entire life revolved around ghost juice economics. Atsuin calculated it at roughly 200 points. 200 points from a single creature. To put that into perspective, I'd previously spent a whole bus ride, crawling around on my hands and knees, unzipping seat covers just to scrape up 15 points. 5 whole seat covers only netted me 75 points, and cost me about 45 minutes of my self-respect. Yet this single, passed-out dwarf was worth nearly triple that amount. Plus, it would slowly recharge over time. Sure, it'd take months, according to Atsuin, but it would naturally regenerate its energy over time, meaning we could just siphon it again, and again, and again forever. It was basically an infinite spirit battery, hooked directly into my territory's power grid, generating free energy around the clock, while my bone squad stood guard over it. Like the scariest power plant workers you've ever seen. We should move fast before it regains consciousness. Atsuin advised, which was honestly the most practical advice I had heard all day long. He immediately grabbed the dwarf by the scruff of its neck, leaving the creature dangling helplessly from his bony hand, like a soggy towel. The second I triggered the recall, a burst of shadowy light flashed through the booth, and poof, they both vanished. And just like that, one skeletal strategist and one hijacked renewable power generator were express shipped straight to the Undead catacomb, courtesy of our mustache chef, who was about to inherit a very baffling new roommate. Xiao Zhang and Xiao Wang watched Atsuin disappear, with looks that I can only describe as pure heartbreak. I kid you not, their eye flames literally dimmed down. They had been happily slurping up energy from the unconscious dwarf, like two kids sharing a giant milkshake, and I had just teleported that milkshake to a completely different zip code. They stared at the empty space where the dwarf had just been sitting, then glanced up at me, then looked right back at the empty spot. If skeletons could pout, these two were doing it, with every single bone in their bodies. I had no real way to fully grasp just how crushed they were feeling, mainly because their way of communicating, their wild teeth chattering and frantic hand gestures, couldn't fully express that they were finally about to get a real meal after decades of starving, only for you to snatch it away in under 5 minutes. Honestly, some emotions are just too deep for charades. Back under the bed, I commanded. They fell in line instantly, sliding beneath the mattress, with the quiet discipline of soldiers, who knew their place, even if that place was cramped, pitch black, and totally devoid of ghost snacks. Finally, I could actually dig into my dinner. This microwave meal had just been sitting there, losing all its heat. Through my whole encounter with that dwarf dude, the sudden ghost autopsy session, the forced strip-down ritual, and that whole interdimensional prisoner handoff. I popped off the lid, beef stir-fry with green peppers, lukewarm at best, but the savory, oily flavors had marinated pretty well. I started shoveling the food down, with the cold, mechanical speed of a guy who had been starving for way too long, and dealing with way too many paranormal distractions. As I chewed, I took a closer look at my stun baton. This little weapon single-handedly won me 2 fights tonight, and it was fast becoming the undisputed MVP of my entire horror game run. Sure, the wrench packed a punch, but weighed 10 pounds and needed a whole wind-up. That cheap clearance knife was completely useless on ghosts. But this baton? Compact, super effective against supernatural threats, and straight-up devastating to parasitic dwarfs, stuck in long wind-up animations. There was just one catch, though. The battery was running dangerously low. Maybe 2 max power shocks left in the tank, before it completely died on me. And I didn't even have a charger. I checked the port, Type-C. Well, at least that pig demon had updated taste in tech. Tomorrow, when the old guard returns for his shift, I'll see if I can borrow a cable from him. Until then, every single shot counts. Power saver mode, fully activated. I monitored him on the camera feed for a few moments, then took another sip of my drink. My water had gone cold, but look, I totally got the situation here. That player had accidentally let a non-human slide in, and he was about to eat a 20-point penalty if he didn't hunt it down and kick it out right away. Every single minute that creature roamed inside the compound was a minute closer to losing those points permanently. The guy was terrified, sprinting alone into a pitch-black residential zone after some shadow monster, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a tiny bell. Objectively speaking, he was in a downright terrible spot.